I am Waylon, 70 years old, and I spent my entire life building an empire from sparks and steel. I thought I was securing my family's future, but I was only funding their arrogance. When my son told me my muddy boots did not belong at his Christmas dinner, I did not argue. I smiled, drove home, and canceled the mortgage payment on his mansion. 3 days later, I woke up to 28 missed calls. Before I tell you the rest, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The biting December wind whipped across the manicured lawn of the suburban estate. I stood on the pristine concrete porch holding a carefully wrapped box containing a handcrafted wooden fire truck. I had spent 2 months carving and painting it for my grandson, Evan. I pressed the illuminated doorbell, listening to the expensive chimes echo inside. The heavy oak door swung open just a few inches, revealing the warm golden glow of the grand foyer and the smell of roasted turkey. Meredith stood in the doorway. She wore a tailored silk dress, a string of expensive pearls resting against her collarbone, and pristine designer heels. Her polite practiced smile vanished instantly when she saw a 70-year-old African-American man in a worn canvas jacket standing on her welcome mat. She gripped the brass handle tight and blocked the entrance, completely refusing to let the winter air inside. I offered a warm greeting and held up the gift, explaining I wanted to see my grandson. Meredith did not open the screen door. She informed me that her elite parents and several prominent corporate investors were currently seated in the formal dining room waiting for the first course. She stated my muddy work boots and unpolished appearance simply did not fit the aesthetic of her formal dinner. DeAndre appeared behind his wife. He wore a crisp velvet blazer paid for by my sweat and sacrifice. He avoided looking directly into my eyes, focusing instead on the frosted bushes lining the driveway. Instead of defending his father, DeAndre told me to leave the toy on the mat and go away. He claimed my presence would ruin the networking opportunity Meredith had carefully orchestrated. He shut the door in my face. The heavy lock clicked shut with a sharp metallic snap. I stood in the freezing cold for exactly 10 seconds. I did not yell. I did not pound my fists against the heavy wood to demand respect or beg for an invitation. I placed the wooden fire truck gently on the frosted welcome mat. I turned my back, walked down the long, freezing driveway to my 10-year-old sedan, and drove home. The drive was completely silent, allowing the deep, bitter sting of betrayal to crystallize into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I had spent 40 years inhaling toxic welding fumes, working grueling double shifts in a suffocating warehouse, and building a highly profitable commercial real estate portfolio from absolute scratch, just so my son would never know the agonizing sting of poverty. Lucille and I had shielded him from the harsh, unforgiving realities of the world, hoping to raise a man of deep character and integrity. I realized tonight I had raised an entitled coward instead. DeAndre was deeply ashamed of his working-class roots, desperate to impress a wife who lived entirely on credit and fiercely protected a pristine social image. I walked into my quiet house and hung my canvas jacket on the hook by the door. I took off my work boots and lined them up neatly against the wall. I did not feel sorrow or grief. I felt a sharp mechanical clarity taking over my mind. The toxic dynamic had to end. I walked into my kitchen and turned on the overhead light. I filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove to boil. I retrieved my laptop from the study and carried it to the kitchen island. I sat down on the wooden stool, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. It was time to initiate a complete structural overhaul of my family tree. A man who banishes his father into the freezing cold on Christmas Eve does not deserve the warmth of his father's wallet. I was ready to execute the first phase of a massive financial correction. For 3 years, I had silently paid the $4,000 monthly mortgage on DeAndre's sprawling suburban mansion. When he first married Meredith, they immediately purchased a house far beyond their actual earning capacity, desperate to maintain an image of elite wealth. I had set up an automatic recurring bank transfer to ensure my son and grandson never had to worry about keeping a roof over their heads. I thought I was providing a secure, loving foundation for their future success. I realized tonight I was merely funding their toxic delusion of superiority. I logged into my primary banking portal, my hands steady and sure. I navigated through the complex menus and located the recurring transfer labeled for DeAndre's estate. The next massive payment was scheduled to process in exactly 48 hours. I hovered my cursor over the cancellation button. A bright red prompt appeared on the screen asking for final confirmation to permanently sever the financial tie. I pressed the button without a single second of hesitation. The digital cord was severed instantly. The bank confirmed the automatic schedule was deleted. DeAndre and Meredith were now entirely responsible for their own massive debt. I closed the laptop, poured myself a hot cup of black coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. I enjoyed the absolute silence of my home. I felt no guilt. I felt the profound peace of a man who had finally stopped bleeding himself dry to keep parasites comfortable. I knew they did not have the cash reserves to cover a $4,000 mortgage payment. I knew Meredith's elite parents would never offer financial assistance to a son-in-law they secretly despised. I finished my coffee and went to bed sleeping soundly for the first time in years. 3 days passed in perfect tranquility. I fixed the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. I pruned the rose bushes Lucille had planted 30 years ago. I read the morning newspaper cover to cover, enjoying the quiet rhythm of my own life. On the morning of December 28th, my peaceful, carefully curated routine shattered entirely. My smartphone began to vibrate violently against the kitchen counter, sliding across the polished granite surface with a loud, aggressive hum. The screen lit up brightly with a relentless barrage of urgent notifications. I picked up the device and looked closely at the screen. The display showed 28 missed calls from DeAndre, accompanied by 14 frantic capitalized text messages demanding my immediate attention. The phone vibrated again, the loud ringtone cutting sharply through the quiet, empty house. DeAndre was calling for the 29th time. The harsh financial reality had finally crashed into their pristine, carefully constructed social facade. The screen of my smartphone illuminated the dark mahogany wood of my kitchen counter. Call number 29 flashed in bright red letters. I picked up the device, swiped the green icon, and raised the phone to my ear. I did not even get the chance to speak a single greeting. DeAndre was screaming at the top of his lungs. His voice was frantic, breathless, and echoing with a genuine primal panic I had not heard from him since he was a small child. He demanded to know what was wrong with my bank account. He yelled that the $4,000 mortgage payment had bounced completely, and the bank had just sent an immediate default warning via certified email. According to DeAndre, the grace period expired at midnight, and the massive financial institution was threatening to apply a severe penalty fee while reporting the delinquency to the national credit bureaus. He knew a missed payment would instantly destroy their pristine credit scores. I listened to his rapid, terrified breathing through the speaker. He ordered me to call my personal bank representative and fix the transfer error immediately. He claimed Meredith was currently having a severe panic attack in their marble master bathroom because her elite parents were sitting down for an extravagant brunch in the formal dining room. DeAndre was absolutely terrified that if the bank called the house phone again, his wealthy in-laws would finally discover that he and Meredith did not actually own the luxury estate they constantly flaunted to their high society friends. He barked a direct order at me. He commanded me to manually wire the funds within the hour to save his fragile social reputation and prevent total humiliation in front of the people he blindly worshipped. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. The bitter warmth grounded me, keeping my mind perfectly clear. I calmly informed my son that there was absolutely no error with my financial institution. I stated that my funds were completely secure and my accounts were in perfect standing. I let that undeniable truth hang in the air for a brief moment before delivering the final blow. I told him I canceled the automatic transfer myself. Complete and utter silence swallowed the other end of the line. The heavy, ragged breathing of a man realizing his ultimate safety net had just vanished filled the speaker. The initial shock morphed rapidly into a blind, vicious rage. DeAndre exploded. He accused me of being petty and vindictive over a simple scheduling misunderstanding on Christmas Eve. He screamed that I was actively trying to ruin his marriage because my fragile feelings were hurt by a minor social slight. He called me a bitter old man holding a pathetic grudge over a pair of muddy work boots. I did not raise my voice, but my tone was cold and unyielding. I corrected his delusion sharply. I reminded him of the grueling decades I spent in the industrial shipping yards burning my lungs with toxic welding gas to ensure he never once went to bed hungry. Lucille and I had skipped meals and delayed our own medical care so he could attend private academies and blend in with the wealthy children he so desperately admired. I told him that a 34-year-old man who casually banishes his own father into the freezing winter night to impress a group of superficial corporate investors is a man fully capable of paying for his own roof. I made it absolutely clear that my hard-earned money would never again subsidize the extravagant lifestyle of a son who viewed his family as a shameful burden. If my physical presence was an embarrassment to his pristine aesthetic, my financial support was officially withdrawn. I told him to act like the wealthy executive he pretended to be and settle his own massive debts without running to his father for a bailout. DeAndre quickly realized his anger was completely ineffective against my logic. He immediately pivoted to the only weapon he had left in his arsenal. He resorted to blatant, malicious, emotional blackmail. His voice dropped into a sinister, threatening growl. He told me that if the $4,000 were not wired into his checking account within the next hour, I would never see my grandson again. He explicitly promised to block my phone number, change the locks on his house, and tell little Evan that his grandfather had entirely abandoned him. He claimed Meredith would fully support this punitive decision, and together they would ensure I died a lonely, forgotten man in an empty house with no one to attend my funeral. The sheer cruelty of his threat solidified my resolve into something resembling forged steel. My son was entirely willing to weaponize his own innocent child to extort cash from his elderly father. I realized that capitulating to this emotional terrorism would only guarantee a lifetime of financial hostage situations. I refused to negotiate with a man who viewed his son as a mere bargaining chip to fund a luxury charade. I informed DeAndre that true family is built on mutual respect and unbreakable loyalty. Since he possessed neither of those qualities, our conversation was officially over. I did not wait for his frantic response. I pulled the phone away from my ear and terminated the call without another word. I immediately powered down the device, plunging my kitchen back into total, undisturbed silence. I knew the silence would not last long. Stripping an arrogant man of his unearned wealth always triggers a violent reaction. DeAndre and Meredith were currently drowning in the terrifying reality of their own financial incompetence. I poured the rest of my coffee into the sink and prepared myself for the inevitable fallout. They were not going to accept this defeat from a man they viewed as their inferior. The peace inside my home lasted exactly 45 minutes. A sudden violent screech of premium rubber tires tore through the quiet tranquility of my working-class neighborhood. I walked calmly to the front window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Meredith's brand-new metallic black luxury sports car swerved aggressively into my driveway, crushing the border of winter azaleas Lucille had planted by the mailbox. The powerful engine roared before abruptly cutting off. DeAndre and Meredith threw their car doors open simultaneously. They did not walk toward my house. They marched furiously up my driveway with aggressive, entitled strides, their expensive designer coats flapping wildly in the freezing winter wind. Their faces were flushed with pure, unadulterated rage. The battle had officially arrived at my doorstep, and I was entirely prepared to fight for everything I had built over a lifetime of sacrifice. The heavy brass knocker on my front door rattled with a violent, rhythmic intensity. Meredith was pounding her fists against the solid oak as if she intended to break it down with her bare hands. DeAndre stood right behind her, his face flushed with a mixture of panic and residual arrogance. I did not rush to answer. I walked calmly through my quiet living room, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. I stepped out onto the porch and planted my feet firmly on the welcome mat, completely blocking their entry into my home. Meredith did not bother with a greeting. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest and demanded I immediately contact my financial broker. She ordered me to liquidate a portion of my retirement savings to cover their delinquent mortgage payment and the accumulated bank penalties. Her voice was shrill, echoing across my quiet working-class street. She accused me of deliberately hoarding vast amounts of wealth, while my own flesh and blood suffered an unimaginable crisis. She claimed my financial independence was fundamentally selfish. She insisted that my money belonged to their family unit and that I had a moral obligation to maintain their high society image. She spoke to me not as a daughter-in-law speaking to her elder, but as a frustrated manager reprimanding a disobedient subordinate. DeAndre simply nodded along, too cowardly to lead the charge but entirely willing to let his wife execute the ambush. They expected me to crumble under the sheer volume of their outrage. They expected the 70-year-old widower to bow his head, apologize for the inconvenience, and hand over a blank check to restore the peace. I did not bow my head. I looked past their furious, entitled faces and fixed my gaze on the brand-new luxury sports car idling aggressively in my driveway. The custom metallic paint gleamed under the morning sun. The vehicle was worth easily over $100,000. I looked back at my son. I asked DeAndre how much the monthly lease on that European machine cost him. He refused to answer, crossing his arms defensively. I did not need him to speak. I knew the exact mathematics of his ruin. I took a deliberate step forward, forcing Meredith to take a step back down the porch stairs. I reminded DeAndre of the blistering summers I spent inside the belly of commercial cargo ships. I reminded him of the grueling double shifts I worked inhaling toxic welding fumes and burning my retinas just to save enough cash to buy him his very first used sedan when he turned 16. Lucille and I had driven vehicles until the engines physically fell apart, so our son would never have to walk to his college classes. I told DeAndre that he repaid decades of my blood and sacrifice by prioritizing a luxury status symbol over a secure roof for his own child. He had deliberately chosen to finance a vanity car while expecting his elderly father to cover his basic housing expenses. I made it absolutely clear that my hard-earned commercial real estate portfolio was built on discipline, and I would never allow a single cent of my wealth to subsidize his profound financial stupidity. I told Meredith she could sell her designer coats and her sports car to save her mansion because she would not be receiving a dime from my accounts. I added that true wealth is not measured by the logos on your clothing or the badge on your vehicle. It is measured by the ability to stand on your own 2 feet without needing to extort the elderly. I instructed them to leave my property immediately. My voice remained completely steady, carrying the heavy, unyielding authority of a man who had forged his life from steel and fire. Meredith lost her carefully crafted temper entirely. Her polite high society facade cracked and shattered right there on my front lawn. She screamed that my blatant refusal to fund their lifestyle was undeniable proof of severe cognitive decline. She claimed no rational father would willfully subject his only son to a brutal foreclosure and public humiliation. DeAndre immediately backed her up, his cowardice evaporating into desperate malice. He stepped forward and explicitly threatened me with the legal system. He stated they were going to file an emergency medical conservatorship with the county court by the end of the week. DeAndre promised to hire aggressive medical experts who would declare me legally incompetent to manage my own affairs due to erratic hostile behavior. He outlined his plan with terrifying precision. Once the judge granted him full power of attorney, he would seize my entire commercial real estate portfolio, liquidate my retirement accounts to pay off his massive debts, and legally force me into a state-run nursing home. Meredith sneered, adding that they would sell this very house to cover their legal fees. They were not simply angry about the canceled mortgage transfer anymore. They were actively conspiring to strip me of my fundamental human rights, steal my life savings, and lock me in a sterile medical facility to fund their vanity. The absolute depravity of their threat hung in the freezing winter air like a toxic cloud. Having delivered their ultimatum, they turned around, climbed back into their luxury sports car, and sped away, leaving deep tire tracks in my frosted grass. They expected me to break down in terror. They expected the threat of a nursing home to force my immediate compliance. They believed they held the ultimate trump card over an aging man who lived alone. They vastly underestimated the sheer, cold resilience of a man who had survived the harshest environments imaginable. I watched their vehicle disappear around the corner, internalizing every single word of their malicious conspiracy. I did not tremble. I did not panic. I walked back inside my home and locked the heavy oak door. I immediately picked up my phone and dialed the direct private line of my estate attorney, Mr. Harding. Mr. Harding was a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who owed his entire career to a commercial scholarship I had anonymously funded decades ago. I instructed him to initiate a full, comprehensive audit of every single property deed and financial account tied to my name. I needed to ensure my defenses were impenetrable before they filed their petition. 2 hours later, Mr. Harding called me back. His usually calm voice was tight with genuine alarm. He did not find a vulnerability in my defense. He found a massive, terrifying anomaly that DeAndre had already executed in secret. I sat across the polished mahogany desk in Mr. Harding's downtown office. The heavy silence of the room was broken only by the clicking of his computer mouse. He turned his laptop monitor toward me. He pointed to a scanned document bearing the fresh embossed seal of the county recorder. It was a commercial property deed transfer. DeAndre did not just threaten my future on my front lawn. He had already actively stolen my past. Using a highly sophisticated forged power of attorney, DeAndre transferred the complete unencumbered ownership of my massive commercial warehouse into a newly formed limited liability company. Mr. Harding tapped a key and pulled up the state corporate registry for the shell company. The entity was registered 3 weeks ago and was controlled entirely by Meredith. They bypassed standard legal scrutiny by leveraging her elite family connections to expedite the fraudulent paperwork through a corrupt notary. The warehouse was not just an empty building. It was the prime, highly coveted real estate where I operated my industrial welding business for 4 decades. It was the very foundation of my wealth. They assumed because I was retired I would never check the county tax records. The sheer magnitude of their theft hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My own son had quietly stripped me of my life's work while smiling at me over Sunday dinners. They had meticulously planned to strip me of my primary asset long before the mortgage payment dispute. DeAndre likely orchestrated the forged documents right under my nose, waiting for the perfect moment to liquidate my legacy. The betrayal was cold, calculated, and completely devoid of any familial loyalty. I stared at the digital copy of the deed. The false signature mocked me. Mr. Harding sat back in his chair and waited for my response, preparing himself for an explosive reaction. I did not yell or curse my son's name. I analyzed the data. Mr. Harding pushed a printed timeline across the desk. He explained that Meredith and DeAndre were not holding on to the property for long-term investments. They were finalizing the sale of my building to a massive corporate urban developer tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The agreed purchase price was exactly $3 million in liquid cash. That money was meant to completely erase DeAndre's hidden debts and elevate Meredith into the upper echelon of her country club social circle. Mr. Harding urged me to call DeAndre and confront him immediately. He suggested filing an emergency court injunction to halt the transfer of the deed. I refused the suggestion completely. I learned on the chaotic floors of the shipyard that warning your enemy only gives them time to fortify their defenses. A direct phone call would allow Meredith to deploy her high-priced crisis management team, move the closing to a secure private location, and spin the narrative to paint me as the aggressor. I sat back in the leather chair and looked closely at the forged signature on the screen. The loop on the W was entirely wrong. It lacked the heavy, calloused pressure I applied to every document I signed. I told Mr. Harding about the blood, sweat, and toxic smoke poured into that warehouse floor. I built that contracting firm from a single rusted welding torch and a rented pickup truck into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Lucille and I used to sweep the sharp metal shavings off that freezing concrete ourselves just to save money on a janitor during the lean years. DeAndre thought he could simply erase 40 years of my grueling, backbreaking labor with a stolen pen and a fake notary stamp. He believed his superficial intelligence outmatched my lifetime of discipline. I told my lawyer I would not stop the multi-million-dollar meeting with a panicked phone call or a quiet legal petition. I intended to detonate their entire operation from the inside out. I wanted to look them in the eye when their false empire crumbled to dust. I instructed Mr. Harding to cancel the injunction request. We were going to let them sit at the closing table. We were going to let them taste the victory before we ripped it straight out of their mouths. Confronting a thief in private teaches them to hide their tracks better. Exposing them in a room full of powerful billionaires destroys them permanently. I instructed Mr. Harding to draft an irrefutable certified forensic fraud report right then and there. We pulled the original unaltered property deed from his secure fireproof vault. We compiled 30 years of my authentic notarized signatures to prove the forgery beyond a shadow of a legal doubt. Mr. Harding typed furiously across his keyboard, preparing a formal notice of criminal liability explicitly addressed to the corporate buyer. I informed Harding that we would hand-deliver this legal bomb directly to the developer at the exact moment of the closing. I explained the strategy clearly. If the developer signed the closing papers, they would be purchasing stolen commercial property and actively engaging in a federal wire fraud conspiracy. The developer would panic to protect their own billions from a federal investigation. They would not just cancel the sale. They would aggressively retaliate against Meredith for dragging their pristine corporate reputation into a felony criminal investigation. We printed the thick stack of documents and sealed them inside a heavy manila envelope. Mr. Harding stamped it with his official legal seal. The trap was perfectly set, loaded with enough legal ammunition to send both my son and my daughter-in-law to federal prison. I placed the envelope inside my worn leather briefcase. I thanked Mr. Harding for his efficiency and walked out of the office into the fading evening light. I drove home, ate a quiet dinner, and prepared my finest tailored suit for the morning. I did not feel an ounce of hesitation or remorse. DeAndre had forced my hand the moment he threatened to lock me inside a nursing home. He viewed me as a disposable asset, a stepping stone to fund Meredith's relentless vanity. I was about to show them the catastrophic cost of underestimating a master welder. I ironed my shirt, polished my shoes, and reviewed the fraud report one final time before going to sleep. The next morning, I drove my 10-year-old sedan to the gleaming glass skyscraper of the corporate developer. I parked my car and walked into the towering marble lobby. My tailored suit and unyielding posture allowed me to bypass the front reception desk entirely. I stepped onto the private executive elevator and rode it to the top floor. Through the transparent glass walls of the main conference room, I saw Meredith. She was smiling radiantly, holding a sleek designer pen over a thick stack of closing documents. DeAndre sat right beside her, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation at the thought of $3 million. The wealthy corporate executives sat across the table, completely unaware they were negotiating with common thieves. I gripped my leather briefcase tightly. I did not knock. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and walked directly into the room, bringing the entire meeting to a dead halt. Meredith dropped her designer pen the exact moment I stepped into the boardroom. It clattered loudly against the polished glass table, shattering the quiet professional murmur of the closing meeting. DeAndre leaped out of his ergonomic leather chair. His face turned a sickly shade of ash gray. He shouted at the top of his lungs, demanding that the executive assistants immediately call security to remove me from the premises. He claimed I was a deranged, estranged relative attempting to disrupt a confidential corporate transaction. I ignored him completely. I did not raise my voice or acknowledge his frantic, desperate gestures. I kept my posture perfectly rigid and walked straight toward the head of the conference table. 3 high-powered corporate developers in tailored suits stared at me in profound confusion. They were entirely unaware they were sitting across from common thieves. The lead executive, a sharp-looking man with silver hair, held up a hand to silence DeAndre. He asked me who I was and why I was trespassing in a closed financial meeting. I stopped at the edge of the table. I looked directly into the eyes of the lead developer. I stated clearly and firmly that my name was Waylon. I informed him that I was the original legal and sole owner of the commercial warehouse his firm was currently attempting to purchase for $3 million. Meredith let out a shrill, breathless gasp. She tried to snatch the closing documents off the table, frantically attempting to hide the fraudulent paperwork. I slammed my heavy leather briefcase onto the glass surface, pinning the documents down. The physical thud echoed like a gunshot in the sterile room. I stared down at Meredith, letting her see the absolute certainty in my eyes. The facade was officially over. I unclasped the brass buckles of my briefcase and pulled out the thick manila envelope Mr. Harding had prepared. I handed it directly to the lead corporate executive. I instructed him to review the contents before he signed a single page of the closing agreement. I explained with surgical precision that the deed currently sitting in front of Meredith was a highly sophisticated forgery. I informed the buyer that DeAndre and Meredith had illegally transferred my commercial property into a newly formed shell company using a falsified power of attorney. I watched the executive's eyes narrow as he opened my envelope. I detailed exactly what he was looking at. He pulled out the original unaltered property deed bearing the authentic county seal. He examined the certified forensic fraud report compiled by my attorney. I pointed out the 30 years of my authentic notarized signatures we had included to prove the forgery beyond a shadow of a legal doubt. I kept my voice incredibly level, ensuring every person in the room absorbed the gravity of the situation. I explicitly warned the lead developer that if his corporation proceeded with the $3 million wire transfer, they would be purchasing stolen commercial property. I stated that completing this transaction would instantly implicate his firm in a massive federal wire fraud conspiracy. I noted that the federal government does not look kindly upon large corporations laundering stolen assets through shell companies. The room fell into a suffocating, heavy silence. The only sound was the rustling of paper as the lead executive meticulously read through the forensic analysis. The color rapidly drained from his face as the sheer magnitude of the liability became clear. He realized his massive development firm was mere seconds away from triggering a catastrophic federal investigation. He looked up from the documents and glared at Meredith. The wealthy, composed veneer of the corporate buyer dissolved into pure, unadulterated fury. He slammed the forged deed back onto the glass table. He realized he had been sitting across from con artists. My son and my daughter-in-law had attempted to use his pristine corporate infrastructure to launder their stolen inheritance. The trap Mr. Harding and I set had snapped shut flawlessly. I stood tall, waiting for the executive to deliver the final blow to their fraudulent empire. The lead developer stood up abruptly, knocking his leather chair backward. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket and immediately dialed his bank representative. He ordered the total and immediate cancellation of the $3 million escrow transfer, demanding the funds be locked back into the corporate holding account. He hung up the phone and turned his absolute wrath onto Meredith. He informed her that his elite legal team would sue her shell company into oblivion for severe breach of contract and malicious fraudulent misrepresentation. He promised to personally ensure that her name was permanently blacklisted across every commercial real estate firm in the entire state. He explicitly threatened to hand over all their preliminary communications directly to the district attorney to assist in the federal fraud probe. Meredith's pristine social image shattered completely. She slammed her fists against the glass table and screamed at the top of her lungs. She shrieked that I had maliciously ruined her life, her reputation, and her entire future over a simple misunderstanding. She accused me of destroying my own family out of pure vindictive spite. I looked at her flushed, furious face without blinking. I replied that I merely secured my own life from a pair of ruthless financial predators. I turned my gaze to DeAndre. He sat frozen in his chair, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic failure of his master plan. He knew he was now facing massive corporate lawsuits on top of imminent federal prison time. I did not offer him a single ounce of pity. I packed my empty leather briefcase, adjusted the cuffs of my tailored suit, and turned my back on them entirely. I walked out of the glass conference room without a second glance. I left my son and my daughter-in-law sitting in the smoking ruins of their shattered, fraudulent empire, surrounded by furious corporate executives preparing to destroy them legally. I walked out of the gleaming skyscraper and stepped into the crisp morning air. My breathing was steady, my heart completely calm. I had successfully protected the legacy I built for Lucille without compromising my dignity. I drove my 10-year-old sedan back to my quiet neighborhood, ready to enjoy the rest of my day in peace. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat by the front window. 2 hours later, the silence of my street was violently broken. A local police cruiser sped around the corner and aggressively parked directly in front of my driveway. The bright red and blue emergency lights flashed intensely against the siding of my house. 2 heavily armed officers stepped out of the vehicle and approached my porch with swift, purposeful strides. Meredith had realized she was facing total ruin, and she had just launched her desperate, malicious retaliation. The heavy knock at the front door vibrated through the floorboards. I did not rush. I walked to the entryway and opened the door. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my porch, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. They asked to confirm my identity. I nodded. The lead officer stepped forward and informed me they were responding to an emergency call regarding a violent felony. He stated that Meredith had filed a formal grand theft auto report. She told the dispatchers that I had violently ambushed her outside a coffee shop, aggressively ripped the keys from her hands, and stolen her luxury sports utility vehicle. The officer pointed directly to my open garage where the metallic black SUV was currently parked. He demanded I hand over the keys immediately and step outside with my hands visible. He warned me that any resistance or refusal to cooperate would result in my immediate arrest for assault and grand larceny. Meredith was furious that I destroyed her corporate real estate scam. She knew she could not beat me in a boardroom, so she attempted to leverage the police to drag me out of my home in handcuffs. She weaponized the legal system to humiliate me. She expected me to panic resist and give the officers a reason to escalate the situation. I did not raise my hands. I did not shout about my innocence or frantically try to explain family drama to armed men. I stepped back smoothly and calmly invited the officers inside my home. I led them directly to the heavy oak bookshelf in my study. Decades of running a commercial welding business in a cutthroat industrial sector taught me one fundamental rule of survival. Always maintain impeccable documentation, because desperate people will always smile in your face while actively plotting to pick your pocket. I slid a concealed panel aside and opened my fireproof wall safe. I extracted a pristine, heavy manila folder. I walked back to the foyer and handed the lead officer the original watermarked vehicle title, the dealership purchase agreement, and the active insurance policy documents. I instructed the officer to read the name printed on the bottom line. I pointed out that the luxury SUV was purchased in full with a cashier's check drawn directly from my personal commercial account. The vehicle was registered exclusively in my name. Meredith's name did not exist on a single piece of state paperwork. I explained to the officers that I had simply allowed my daughter-in-law to drive the vehicle as a temporary courtesy. I officially revoked that courtesy this morning. I utilized my own spare key fob to enter my own property and drove my own vehicle back to my own garage. I did not ambush anyone. I simply reclaimed a financial asset. The officers scrutinized the ironclad legal documents. Their aggressive, tense posture completely evaporated within seconds. The lead officer let out a heavy sigh, realizing instantly that they had been deliberately manipulated. Meredith had lied to an emergency dispatcher to settle a personal vendetta. Filing a false police report to trigger a felony response is a severe crime. The officers apologized for the intrusion and prepared to leave to address Meredith's fraudulent emergency call. I did not let them leave just yet. I informed the lead officer that since Meredith no longer had access to the SUV she was currently in, unauthorized possession of my secondary vehicle. I owned a sleek imported luxury sedan that I had previously allowed my son DeAndre to use for his daily commute. I stated clearly that I was officially revoking that permission right now. I formally reported the sedan as stolen property. I pulled up a tracking application on my tablet and handed the screen to the police. The application displayed the exact coordinates from the vehicle's onboard GPS system. The tracking beacon indicated the stolen sedan was currently parked at the valet stand of the highly exclusive gated country club across town. Meredith was currently hosting an elite, high society charity luncheon for her wealthy peers. The lead officer radioed dispatch immediately. He coordinated a patrol unit and a flatbed tow truck to recover the stolen property from the country club. They were also instructed to confront Meredith regarding her fabricated assault claim. I thanked the officers for their swift professionalism and locked my front door as they drove away. Meredith stood in the grand ballroom of the country club, sipping vintage champagne and boasting to the city's elite. Her pristine social image was violently shattered the moment a heavy tow truck and two police cruisers pulled directly up to the valet stand with their emergency lights flashing. Uniformed officers interrupted her luncheon, publicly repossessing the luxury sedan and loudly questioning her about filing a false felony report. She was utterly humiliated in front of the exact people she worshipped. The financial and social ruin was absolute. DeAndre received the phone call regarding the police confrontation while sitting in the ashes of his destroyed corporate reputation. He realized he was facing millions in corporate lawsuits, imminent federal prison time for wire fraud, and the total collapse of his marriage. Stripped of his money and his pride, DeAndre completely snapped. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the heavy, peaceful silence of my home was violently shattered by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass at the back kitchen door. The heavy, peaceful silence of my home was violently shattered precisely at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was lying awake in my master bedroom, anticipating the inevitable fallout of my son's total financial collapse. The unmistakable jarring sound of thick glass shattering echoed from the back of the house, slicing through the freezing winter night. I sat up and immediately reached for the digital security tablet resting on my nightstand. The high-definition infrared cameras illuminating the rear patio displayed a scene of pure, unadulterated desperation. DeAndre stood on my back porch, his velvet blazer ruined by the freezing rain. He clutched a heavy rusted steel crowbar in his gloved hands. He swung the heavy tool aggressively against the reinforced glass pane of my kitchen door, shattering the outer layer. He reached through the jagged shards, unlocked the deadbolt, and pushed his way into my home. His face was twisted into a mask of absolute panic and manic determination. I was not looking for a place to sleep. He was actively hunting for the fireproof wall safe hidden in my study. Stripped of his forged warehouse deed and locked out of his frozen bank accounts, DeAndre knew he was facing immediate federal wire fraud charges and massive corporate lawsuits. The wealthy developers he tried to scam were demanding their money. He was desperately searching for the stack of unregistered bearer bonds I kept secured in my home to pay off his furious corporate enemies. My son had officially crossed the line from entitled arrogance into dangerous felony criminality. He stepped over the broken glass and raised the crowbar, preparing to tear apart the interior walls of the house I had built with my own 2 hands to find my life savings. I did not rush down the stairs. I did not grab a weapon or confront a desperate, ruined man armed with a heavy steel crowbar. Decades of managing highly volatile industrial construction sites taught me that directly engaging a panicked individual only guarantees catastrophic physical collateral damage. I remained locked securely inside my master bedroom. I calmly activated the primary control panel on my security tablet. After my wife Lucille passed away, I knew I needed to secure my property against external threats. I utilized my extensive commercial welding expertise to custom fabricate and install heavy-grade steel storm shutters over every single window and exterior door frame of my residence. I tapped the red icon on the glowing digital screen. A loud mechanical grinding noise instantly reverberated throughout the entire structure of the house. The thick steel plates dropped simultaneously from their hidden ceiling compartments, slamming down over the shattered kitchen door and all the surrounding windows with a tremendous localized thud. The heavy locking mechanisms engaged automatically, creating an impenetrable metal barrier. DeAndre froze in the middle of my kitchen, his crowbar raised mid-air. He spun around, staring at the solid wall of steel that had just completely sealed off his only exit. He was entirely trapped inside the perimeter of the kitchen, boxed in by reinforced walls and impenetrable metal shutters. I watched his bravado evaporate on the high-definition camera feed. He ran to the back door and pushed against the steel plate, but his efforts were entirely useless against commercial-grade reinforcement. He realized he was locked inside a cage of his own making. I tapped the secondary icon on my tablet, instantly activating the high-decibel interior security alarms. A piercing, deafening siren erupted from the ceiling speakers directly above DeAndre's head, flashing blinding strobe lights across the kitchen tiles. I immediately dialed the emergency dispatch line. I calmly informed the operator that a hostile intruder armed with a deadly weapon had forcibly broken into my residence and was currently detained inside the rear sector of the house. I provided my exact address and confirmed I was safely secured on the 2nd floor. The dispatcher assured me multiple patrol units were already en route. I disconnected the call and watched the camera feed as my son frantically struck the steel shutters with his crowbar. Each desperate swing yielded nothing but a dull, metallic clang that was completely drowned out by the blaring sirens. He was a trapped rat waiting for the exterminator. The police arrived in exactly 4 minutes. The flashing red and blue emergency lights illuminated the front lawn, casting sharp shadows across my bedroom walls. 4 heavily armed officers approached the front perimeter. I disabled the steel shutter covering the main entrance from my tablet and remotely unlocked the front door, allowing the authorities immediate access to the premises. They swarmed into the house with their weapons drawn, moving swiftly toward the blaring noise in the kitchen. I deactivated the siren to allow the officers to issue clear verbal commands. The sudden silence in the house was stark and terrifying. The lead officer ordered the intruder to drop the weapon and get on the floor. DeAndre immediately released the crowbar. It clattered loudly against the kitchen tile. He collapsed onto his knees, sobbing uncontrollably as the officers forced his hands behind his back and secured the heavy metal handcuffs around his wrists. I unlocked my bedroom door and walked slowly down the wooden staircase. I stood on the bottom step and looked directly into my kitchen. DeAndre was pinned against the floor by two officers. He twisted his neck to look at me. His eyes were wide with absolute terror. He begged me to call off the police. He cried out that a felony burglary charge would completely destroy whatever was left of his shattered life. He pleaded for mercy, claiming he was family and simply made a desperate mistake because his bank accounts were frozen. I looked at the shattered glass covering my floor and the crowbar resting near his boots. I told him family does not shatter doors in the dead of night to steal a man's life savings. I informed the officers that I intended to press maximum charges for felony breaking and entering and armed burglary. The police hauled my weeping son to his feet and dragged him out the front door into the freezing winter night. I watched the cruiser drive away, sealing his absolute ruin. The morning sun rose over my quiet neighborhood, casting a pale, cold light across the frost-covered grass. I swept up the broken glass in the kitchen and contacted a contractor to repair the damaged door frame. DeAndre was sitting in a concrete holding cell awaiting a bail hearing he could not possibly afford. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, expecting the day to proceed in relative peace. I was entirely mistaken. A sleek, elongated black town car pulled smoothly into my driveway, stopping precisely where Meredith's luxury SUV had crushed my azaleas days prior. A sharply dressed chauffeur stepped out and opened the rear passenger doors. Meredith's elite, wealthy parents stepped onto my property. They wore impeccable designer winter coats and carried themselves with profound aristocratic arrogance. They were not carrying weapons. They were carrying a checkbook, preparing to launch a completely different kind of warfare. The elongated black town car idled aggressively in my driveway. Meredith's parents, the self-proclaimed elite of the city's high society, stepped onto my front porch. They were dressed in impeccable cashmere and carried themselves with profound aristocratic arrogance. I opened the door and allowed them inside. They did not remove their designer coats. They sat stiffly on my living room sofa, looking around my modest working-class home with thinly veiled disgust. The father, a senior partner at a prestigious corporate law firm, did not offer a handshake or a polite greeting. He reached directly into his tailored breast pocket, pulled out a leather-bound checkbook, and clicked a gold fountain pen. He wrote out a check for $50,000 and slid it across my coffee table. He demanded I immediately drop the armed burglary charges against DeAndre and permanently retract the commercial real estate fraud claim against Meredith. The mother leaned forward, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. She claimed that my family drama was actively jeopardizing their pristine social reputation at the country club. She insulted my background, directly stating that a retired master welder simply did not understand how high society finance operated. She implied that I should take the hush money and be extremely grateful, insisting that $50,000 was more cash than a man of my limited blue-collar stature had ever seen at one time. They expected me to snatch the check, eagerly drop to my knees in absolute gratitude, and quietly disappear back into the industrial shadows where I supposedly belonged. They genuinely believed their old money could erase multiple severe federal felonies and buy my silence forever. They told me that sending a young elite couple to federal prison over a simple financial misunderstanding was a barbaric lower-class reaction. They insisted that wealthy families solve their disputes behind closed doors with checkbooks, not with police cruisers and steel shutters. They commanded me to call the district attorney right now and recant my entire statement. I did not reach for the check. I leaned back in my armchair, crossed my arms, and looked at the two arrogant individuals sitting in my living room. I informed them that my commercial real estate portfolio generated $50,000 in passive revenue every 2 weeks. I told them their bribe was not only highly offensive, but it was also painfully cheap. I reached beneath the coffee table and retrieved a thick, certified legal folder. Mr. Harding had meticulously prepared this specific dossier the moment we discovered Meredith's fraudulent shell company. I picked up their handwritten check, tore it precisely in half, and let the pieces flutter onto the floor. I slid the heavy folder across the glass table directly into the father's hands. I instructed him to review the official bank routing numbers and the notarized wire transfer logs inside. I watched his arrogant, composed expression dissolve into absolute horror as his eyes scanned the highlighted financial data. The documents provided undeniable proof that Meredith had systematically embezzled $80,000 directly from her own parents' private retirement trust over the past 2 years. Mr. Harding's forensic accountant had tracked every single stolen dollar. Meredith did not use the stolen funds to secure her future or invest in property. She funneled the embezzled cash through a series of shadow accounts to finance her extravagant designer wardrobe, her exclusive country club membership, and the luxury sports car that was currently sitting in a police impound lot. I explained that Meredith lived entirely on credit and stolen family money using their hard-earned retirement savings to maintain a fabricated image of supreme wealth. I looked the mother dead in the eye and stated clearly that her daughter was not a victim of my alleged cruelty. Her daughter was a prolific, unrepentant thief. I told them they were actively enabling a criminal who viewed their life savings with the exact same greedy entitlement she viewed mine. They had come to my house to purchase my silence. Instead, I handed them the irrefutable proof of their own daughter's ultimate betrayal. I explained that my late wife Lucille and I built our wealth by working tirelessly, bleeding for every dollar, while their daughter simply forged signatures and transferred funds to buy the illusion of success. I made it clear that I do not accept hush money from the parents of a felon. The wealthy patriarch's hands trembled violently as he gripped the forensic audit. The pristine high society facade he had worn into my home completely shattered, leaving behind only the devastating reality of a man who had just been robbed blind by his own flesh and blood. The mother covered her mouth, stifling a sharp, agonizing gasp as she read the itemized list of designer handbags and luxury vacations funded entirely by her drained retirement accounts. Their arrogance evaporated, instantly replaced by a suffocating, deeply humiliating realization. I did not offer them a single ounce of sympathy. I stood up from my armchair and pointed a steady finger toward my front door. I ordered them out of my house immediately. I stated that the commercial fraud charges against Meredith and the felony burglary charges against DeAndre were moving forward to the district attorney today, and no amount of aristocratic whining would stop the legal process. The father stood up, his face pale and hardened with a terrifying new fury. He did not ask me to reconsider. He did not offer another bribe. He looked at his wife and told her that Meredith was officially dead to them. He swore he would hire his own legal team to prosecute his daughter for the embezzlement. They walked out of my house, got into their elongated black town car, and ordered their chauffeur to drive away. They drove straight to their bank to freeze their remaining trusts, disowning their daughter on the spot and abandoning her to face the criminal justice system entirely alone. My home returned to its peaceful silence. The elite power players had been utterly neutralized by hard, undeniable facts. I watched through the window as their vehicle sped away, knowing I had just severed Meredith's final lifeline. She had alienated me, and now she had alienated the only people capable of paying for her criminal defense attorneys. I returned to my kitchen, satisfied that the arrogant predators had been successfully dismantled. But a desperate man with nothing left to lose is always the most dangerous element on the board. Later that same afternoon, DeAndre managed to secure his temporary release from the county jail. He utilized a highly predatory, high-interest bail bondsman, leveraging the very last fraction of his available credit just to walk out the door. Stripped of his corporate career, locked out of his foreclosed mansion, and facing decades in federal prison, DeAndre grew incredibly desperate. He returned to his empty, powerless house to search through his remaining moving boxes. He was frantically looking for anything of value to sell on the black market to pay for a defense attorney. Instead, he produced a terrifying new weapon. DeAndre miraculously discovered a deeply hidden, highly suspicious legal document. It was a counterfeit will allegedly belonging to my late wife Lucille, expressly designed to strip me of my entire fortune and legally force the immediate liquidation of my commercial estate. The screen of my smartphone illuminated the dark mahogany wood of my kitchen counter. Call number 29 flashed in bright red letters. I picked up the device, swiped the green icon, and raised the phone to my ear. I did not even get the chance to speak a single greeting. DeAndre was screaming at the top of his lungs. His voice was frantic, breathless, and echoing with a genuine primal panic I had not heard from him since he was a small child. He demanded to know what was wrong with my bank account. He yelled that the $4,000 mortgage payment had bounced completely, and the bank had just sent an immediate default warning via certified email. According to DeAndre, the grace period expired at midnight, and the massive financial institution was threatening to apply a severe penalty fee while reporting the delinquency to the national credit bureaus. He knew a missed payment would instantly destroy their pristine credit scores. I listened to his rapid, terrified breathing through the speaker. He ordered me to call my personal bank representative and fix the transfer error immediately. He claimed Meredith was currently having a severe panic attack in their marble master bathroom because her elite parents were sitting down for an extravagant brunch in the formal dining room. DeAndre was absolutely terrified that if the bank called the house phone again, his wealthy in-laws would finally discover that he and Meredith did not actually own the luxury estate they constantly flaunted to their high society friends. He barked a direct order at me. He commanded me to manually wire the funds within the hour to save his fragile social reputation and prevent total humiliation in front of the people he blindly worshipped. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. The bitter warmth grounded me, keeping my mind perfectly clear. I calmly informed my son that there was absolutely no error with my financial institution. I stated that my funds were completely secure and my accounts were in perfect standing. I let that undeniable truth hang in the air for a brief moment before delivering the final blow. I told him I canceled the automatic transfer myself. Complete and utter silence swallowed the other end of the line. The heavy, ragged breathing of a man realizing his ultimate safety net had just vanished filled the speaker. The initial shock morphed rapidly into a blind, vicious rage. DeAndre exploded. He accused me of being petty and vindictive over a simple scheduling misunderstanding on Christmas Eve. He screamed that I was actively trying to ruin his marriage because my fragile feelings were hurt by a minor social slight. He called me a bitter old man holding a pathetic grudge over a pair of muddy work boots. I did not raise my voice, but my tone was cold and unyielding. I corrected his delusion sharply. I reminded him of the grueling decades I spent in the industrial shipping yards burning my lungs with toxic welding gas to ensure he never once went to bed hungry. Lucille and I had skipped meals and delayed our own medical care so he could attend private academies and blend in with the wealthy children he so desperately admired. I reminded him that he chose to finance a luxury lifestyle on credit rather than securing his own foundational needs. I told him that a 34-year-old man who casually banishes his own father into the freezing winter night to impress a group of superficial corporate investors is a man fully capable of paying for his own roof. I made it absolutely clear that my hard-earned money would never again subsidize the extravagant lifestyle of a son who viewed his family as a shameful burden. If my physical presence was an embarrassment to his pristine aesthetic, my financial support was officially withdrawn. I told him to act like the wealthy executive he pretended to be and settle his own massive debts without running to his father for a bailout. DeAndre quickly realized his anger was completely ineffective against my logic. He immediately pivoted to the only weapon he had left in his arsenal. He resorted to blatant, malicious, emotional blackmail. His voice dropped into a sinister, threatening growl. He told me that if the $4,000 were not wired into his checking account within the next hour, I would never see my grandson again. He explicitly promised to block my phone number, change the locks on his house, and tell little Evan that his grandfather had entirely abandoned him. He claimed Meredith would fully support this punitive decision, and together they would ensure I died a lonely, forgotten man in an empty house with no one to attend my funeral. The sheer cruelty of his threat solidified my resolve into something resembling forged steel. My son was entirely willing to weaponize his own innocent child to extort cash from his elderly father. I realized that capitulating to this emotional terrorism would only guarantee a lifetime of financial hostage situations. I refused to negotiate with a man who viewed his son as a mere bargaining chip to fund a luxury charade. I informed DeAndre that true family is built on mutual respect and unbreakable loyalty. Since he possessed neither of those qualities, our conversation was officially over. I did not wait for his frantic response. I pulled the phone away from my ear and terminated the call without another word. I immediately powered down the device, plunging my kitchen back into total, undisturbed silence. I knew the silence would not last long. Stripping an arrogant man of his unearned wealth always triggers a violent reaction. DeAndre and Meredith were currently drowning in the terrifying reality of their own financial incompetence. I poured the rest of my coffee into the sink and prepared myself for the inevitable fallout. They were not going to accept this defeat from a man they viewed as their inferior. The peace inside my home lasted exactly 45 minutes. A sudden violent screech of premium rubber tires tore through the quiet tranquility of my working-class neighborhood. I walked calmly to the front window and pulled back the heavy curtain. Meredith's brand-new metallic black luxury sports car swerved aggressively into my driveway, crushing the border of winter azaleas Lucille had planted by the mailbox. The powerful engine roared before abruptly cutting off. DeAndre and Meredith threw their car doors open simultaneously. They did not walk toward my house. They marched furiously up my driveway with aggressive, entitled strides, their expensive designer coats flapping wildly in the freezing winter wind. Their faces were flushed with pure, unadulterated rage. The battle had officially arrived at my doorstep, and I was entirely prepared to fight for everything I had built over a lifetime of sacrifice. I parked my 10-year-old sedan along the pristine cobblestone street of the city's most exclusive arts district. The elite auction house stood before me, boasting heavy mahogany doors and frosted glass windows designed to keep working-class people out. I pushed the heavy doors open and walked directly to the main appraisal desk. The chief broker, a sharp-featured man in an expensive Italian suit, looked up from his computer monitor. He immediately assessed my canvas jacket and calloused hands, his expression hardening into practiced condescension. He informed me that the gallery was closed for private viewings and asked me to leave the premises. I did not move a single muscle. I placed my leather briefcase on his pristine glass counter. I informed the broker that I was tracking the precise serial number of a stolen heirloom diamond brooch that recently passed through his specific inventory. I demanded the original consignment receipt for the transaction. The broker scoffed, puffing out his chest defensively. He explicitly refused my demand, citing strict corporate policies regarding high society client confidentiality. He threatened to call building security if I did not exit his gallery immediately. I did not raise my voice. I smoothly reached into my briefcase and extracted the official stamped police report detailing the grand theft of the diamond. I placed it directly over his keyboard. I looked the broker dead in the eye. I calmly explained the severe federal penalties for a commercial gallery actively fencing stolen goods. I informed him that he could either hand over the documentation verifying the identity of the thief right now, or I would invite the local precinct detectives to shut down his entire business pending a massive criminal investigation. The broker's arrogant high society facade evaporated the exact moment he processed the immediate threat to his lucrative business license. The color drained from his face as he realized I was not a confused old man wandering off the street. I was a man armed with ironclad legal documentation and zero hesitation to destroy his livelihood. He did not call security. He snatched the police report, read the precise serial numbers, and immediately scurried into his secure back office. He returned less than 3 minutes later, his hands trembling visibly as he slid a heavy watermarked consignment folder across the glass counter. I opened the folder and examined the original transaction receipt. I did not need to hire a forensic handwriting expert to identify the thief. The elegant sweeping signature at the bottom of the page belonged exclusively to Meredith. My daughter-in-law had personally fenced the stolen heirloom for $35,000 in liquid cash. I stared at the signature, a cold, mechanical rage solidifying in my chest. I remembered the exact day I purchased that specific diamond brooch for my late wife, Lucille. I had worked grueling overtime shifts at the shipyard for an entire year, hiding the extra cash inside a rusted coffee can in my garage to surprise her on our 30th wedding anniversary. Lucille had wept with joy. She wore that brooch proudly to every single church service until the brutal reality of pancreatic cancer stripped away her strength. During her final months, when she was confined to a hospice bed in our home, she kept the diamond securely in her jewelry box. She intended to leave it as a foundational piece of our family legacy. Meredith had crept into a dying woman's sanctuary and stolen her most prized possession simply to buy designer shoes and maintain her fabricated country club aesthetic. The absolute, unrepentant depravity of my daughter-in-law erased any lingering trace of mercy I held for my son's family. They were ruthless financial predators completely devoid of basic human decency. I secured the original signed consignment receipt inside my leather briefcase. I thanked the pale, terrified broker for his swift cooperation and walked out of the gallery. I did not drive to DeAndre's foreclosed mansion to confront Meredith. I did not call my son to gloat about uncovering their despicable theft. Confronting a criminal in private simply gives them an opportunity to destroy evidence and fabricate a defense. I drove my sedan directly to the local police precinct downtown. I walked through the double doors and requested an immediate meeting with the lead detective assigned to the Property Crimes Division. I sat across from the detective's steel desk and opened my briefcase. I did not offer an emotional story about family betrayal. I handed him the original police report, the verified serial number documentation from the jeweler, and the original auction house consignment receipt bearing Meredith's undeniable signature. I officially filed formal criminal charges for grand larceny against my own daughter-in-law. The detective meticulously reviewed the airtight stack of documents. He matched the dates of the theft to the exact timeline of Meredith's financial transaction at the elite gallery. He looked up at me and confirmed that the evidence was completely irrefutable. He explained that because the value of the stolen diamond vastly exceeded the state threshold, Meredith was now facing a severe felony indictment. He informed me that he was initiating the immediate process for a formal arrest warrant. The legal machinery I had set in motion was now entirely unstoppable. My money was secure, my property was protected. The thieves who tried to systematically dismantle my life were being methodically crushed by the brutal weight of the criminal justice system. I thanked the detective, shook his hand, and walked out of the precinct into the crisp afternoon air. 2 days later, a uniformed officer knocked on the door of the working-class apartment Meredith had been forced to rent after the bank seized her luxury estate. The officer handed her a formal police summons for felony grand larceny, facing imminent, unavoidable prison time for grand theft, corporate fraud, and embezzlement. Meredith completely snapped. She realized she could not beat me in a corporate boardroom or a court of law. She decided her only remaining option was to destroy me in the court of public opinion. Desperate to salvage her shattered social image and taint my credibility before her criminal trial began, she launched a vicious, highly fabricated digital smear campaign. She turned on her camera and prepared to broadcast her lies to the entire world. The notification pinged on my tablet just after sunrise. It was a high-priority alert from my commercial leasing manager. Meredith had not surrendered after receiving her felony summons. She had gone on the offensive. Facing unavoidable prison time for grand larceny, she launched a vicious, highly fabricated digital smear campaign to completely obliterate my public credibility. I opened the link sent by my manager. Meredith sat in front of a camera in a dimly lit room wearing zero makeup and an oversized sweater to appear incredibly fragile. She stared directly into the lens and unleashed a masterclass in manipulation. She wept hysterically, spinning a horrific, entirely fictional narrative. She told her hundreds of thousands of followers that her father-in-law was a dangerous, senile man suffering from a violent psychotic break. She claimed I had physically assaulted DeAndre on Christmas Eve, forcibly evicted them from their home out of pure malice, and completely abandoned my allegedly sick grandson to freeze in the streets. The highly edited, emotionally manipulative video went viral within hours. Her elite country club network and massive online audience blindly swallowed every single lie. The digital mob mobilized instantly, and the damage quickly bled into the real world. My commercial real estate business, built on 4 decades of pristine integrity, was heavily besieged. The phone lines at my leasing office rang off the hook with furious, misinformed vendors. Hundreds of fake one-star negative reviews flooded my corporate directory, accusing my company of being run by a violent, abusive monster. Meredith was desperately attempting to poison the jury pool and destroy my reputation before her criminal trial even began. She believed that if she discredited the accuser, her grand theft charges would magically disappear into the ensuing chaos. Mr. Harding arrived at my house before noon, his briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. He was furious on my behalf. He paced across my living room floor, drafting a massive legal retaliation in his head. He urged me to authorize an immediate, aggressive public cease and desist letter. He wanted to threaten Meredith and her social media platforms with multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuits to force the video offline. I poured Mr. Harding a cup of black coffee and shook my head. I flatly refused his legal strategy. Sending a frantic cease and desist letter looks inherently defensive and fundamentally weak. It signals to the public that you are terrified of the allegations. I learned a long time ago on the unforgiving floors of the industrial shipyards that when an opponent is actively digging their own grave, you do not snatch the shovel out of their hands. You simply step back and wait for them to hit the bottom. I told Harding we would let her keep digging in the full view of the public eye. Instead of drafting legal threats, I opened my encrypted home security server. I navigated to the archived files from the past month. I meticulously gathered the raw, unedited, high-definition audiovisual footage from my porch cameras. I pulled the crisp recording of Christmas Eve, clearly showing Meredith in her designer silk dress, cruelly mocking my canvas jacket and callously turning me away from my own grandson. Then I pulled the extended multi-angle footage of Meredith and DeAndre attempting to forcefully ambush me with the fraudulent, unlicensed chiropractor they hired to declare me insane. The microphones had captured every single venomous, entitled word they uttered. The footage was pristine, continuous, and absolutely undeniable. I transferred the massive video files onto a secure portable flash drive. Mr. Harding watched the brutal, unedited reality of their extortion play out on my monitor. He slowly closed his legal pad, a sharp, predatory smile replacing his initial outrage. He realized a defamation lawsuit would take months to litigate in a courtroom, but undeniable raw footage would execute Meredith's social standing in a matter of seconds. We were not going to fight a public relations war with typed statements or angry press releases. We were going to let Meredith's own recorded malice act as her judge, jury, and executioner. The viral outrage continued to escalate at a terrifying pace over the next 48 hours. My personal email inbox was completely inundated with vile, aggressive hate mail from absolute strangers. Meredith's elite high society followers actively mobilized, launching digital petitions, demanding that adult protective services investigate me for severe elder madness and family abuse. They tagged local news stations, trying to turn my fabricated mental decline into a regional scandal. DeAndre leaned into his wife's manufactured victimhood, posting sad, cryptic updates about praying for his father's broken mind. They were reveling in their temporary digital victory, confident that a working-class retired welder possessed absolutely no understanding of how to combat a modern social media crisis. They assumed I would cower inside my home, entirely paralyzed by the sheer volume of public hatred. They were catastrophically mistaken. I did not waste my time attempting to upload defensive counter videos to social media platforms controlled by algorithms. I preferred undeniable, inescapable physical reality. I contacted the largest commercial advertising firm in the county. I utilized a fraction of the liquid cash generated by my warehouse sale to purchase a premium, highly coveted advertising contract. I leased the massive high-definition digital billboard located directly across the street from the main entrance of Meredith's highly exclusive, heavily guarded country club. It was the exact location where she and her elite friends gathered every single Sunday for their extravagant champagne-fueled brunches. The advertising firm attempted to review the media file, but Mr. Harding applied immense legal pressure, citing a strict, ironclad non-disclosure agreement regarding the broadcast content. The firm accepted my premium payment and handed over the digital broadcasting rights for the weekend. I uploaded the unedited security footage directly to the billboard's central server. I meticulously programmed the display schedule to ensure maximum visibility. I did not want a passing glance. I wanted a captive audience. I set the broadcast to loop the raw porch encounters, continuously amplifying the high-fidelity audio through the billboard's localized commercial speakers. Meredith thought she could control the narrative by crying behind a heavily filtered smartphone screen. I was about to project her actual malicious reality onto a 50-foot glowing canvas right in the heart of her pristine high-society sanctuary. Sunday morning arrived with crisp, clear skies. The parking lot of the elite country club was entirely packed with luxury vehicles. Hundreds of wealthy patrons, including Meredith and her influential peers, were seated on the expansive outdoor patio enjoying their extravagant brunch service. At precisely 11 o'clock, the massive digital billboard across the street powered on with a brilliant, blinding flash. The standard luxury car advertisements vanished completely. The crisp, high-definition security footage of my front porch filled the 50-foot screen. Meredith's cruel, arrogant voice echoed across the manicured lawns, amplified clearly for every single club member to hear. She was caught dead to rights, mocking my working-class boots and openly threatening to lock me in a nursing home. The champagne glasses stopped clinking. The entire patio fell into a stunned, paralyzed silence. The 50-foot digital screen loomed over the pristine, wrought-iron gates of the country club, casting a harsh, unyielding glare across the manicured lawns. I sat parked in my 10-year-old sedan half a block away, watching the absolute destruction of Meredith's fabricated reality unfold in real time. The massive commercial speakers I had specifically leased for this broadcast did not disappoint. Meredith's shrill, arrogant voice echoed across the open-air dining patio with crystal-clear, high-fidelity audio. The entire brunch crowd, consisting of the city's most influential socialites, corporate executives, and generational wealth holders, sat paralyzed in their wrought-iron chairs. They watched the screen display Meredith in her designer silk dress, sneering at my canvas jacket and explicitly stating that a working-class grandfather did not fit the aesthetic of her holiday party. The footage seamlessly transitioned to the second clip. The high-definition security video displayed DeAndre and Meredith aggressively attempting to force the fraudulent, unlicensed chiropractor into my home. The audio captured DeAndre explicitly outlining his malicious plan to lock me in a state-run nursing home to seize my commercial assets. The wealthy patrons stopped chewing their catered meals. Champagne flutes were slowly lowered back onto linen tablecloths. The sheer, undeniable malice radiating from the screen completely shattered the fragile, victimized narrative Meredith had spent the last 48 hours cultivating online. I watched the elite crowd turn their heads simultaneously toward the center of the patio where Meredith and DeAndre were currently seated. There was no confusion in the eyes of their peers, only pure, unadulterated disgust. The undeniable truth was 50 feet tall and impossible to ignore. Meredith dropped her crystal mimosa glass. It shattered against the flagstone patio, but not a single waiter rushed forward to clean the mess. She stared up at the digital billboard in absolute breathless horror. Her carefully constructed high society facade disintegrated right there under the Sunday morning sun. The women she had desperately tried to impress for years began to stand up from their tables. They They did not offer her comfort or ask for an explanation. They pulled their expensive coats tight and physically walked away from her, treating her like a walking contagion. Meredith frantically reached for her smartphone, her fingers trembling violently as she opened her social media applications. The real-world execution was already syncing perfectly with the digital fallout. The patrons on the patio had instantly recorded the billboard broadcast on their own devices and uploaded the footage directly to the internet. The raw, unedited security videos spread like wildfire, completely eclipsing her fake, tear-filled smear campaign. I watched her screen light up from afar as the notifications poured in. The brands that sponsored her elite influencer lifestyle were watching the exact same footage. Her lucrative corporate partnerships evaporated in a matter of seconds. High-end fashion boutiques and luxury lifestyle companies publicly issued formal statements severing all ties with her, vehemently condemning her horrific elder abuse. Her followers, who had aggressively targeted my commercial real estate business just 24 hours prior, instantly turned their vicious digital mob mentality directly onto her. They flooded her comment sections with the undeniable proof of her grand larceny and emotional manipulation. She was no longer the tragic, misunderstood victim of a senile father-in-law. She was officially exposed as a ruthless, calculating predator who stole from a dying woman and attempted to medically kidnap an innocent man. Meredith covered her face with her hands, letting out a sharp, humiliated sob. She looked around the patio for a single sympathetic face and found absolutely nothing but hard, judging stares. The country club manager approached their table quietly but firmly, asking them to leave the premises to prevent any further disruption to the membership. I sat in my sedan, my hands resting steadily on the steering wheel. I had not sent a single angry text message or filed a single defamation lawsuit. I simply let the undeniable truth breathe the open air. DeAndre grabbed Meredith by the arm and practically dragged her off the country club patio. They sprinted toward the parking lot, their heads bowed in total disgrace. Since the police had rightfully repossessed their luxury vehicles, they were forced to wait in the humid morning air for a cheap ride-share service while their former friends watched them from the balcony. I started my engine and followed them from a safe, undetectable distance. The rideshare dropped them off at the edge of their sprawling suburban estate. The bank foreclosure notices were already taped securely to their front door. The moment their feet hit the manicured grass, the fractured remains of their toxic marriage violently exploded. DeAndre spun around and screamed directly into Meredith's face. He blamed her entirely for the public exposure. He shouted that her desperate need for internet validation and her reckless decision to post the fake crying video had provoked me into deploying the billboard. Meredith shrieked right back, her voice raw and abrasive. She blamed DeAndre for his profound financial incompetence. She reminded him that his forged signature on the commercial loan was the catalyst for their total ruin, and his cowardly inability to handle his own father had cost her everything. I watched them from the end of the cul-de-sac. DeAndre threw his hands in the air, cursing the day he let her convince him to steal the warehouse deed. Meredith countered by mocking his unemployment and his impending felony trial. The loyalty they claimed to possess was nothing but a fragile alliance of convenience entirely dependent on my stolen wealth to survive. Now that the cash flow was permanently severed, the underlying rot of their relationship was fully exposed for the entire neighborhood to witness. They had completely run out of money, out of credit, and out of scapegoats. They had nobody left to attack but each other. DeAndre realized that screaming on the lawn would not stop the district attorney from pressing charges for the forged commercial deed. He knew I possessed the original authenticated documents capable of sending him to a federal penitentiary. Panic drove him to execute one final terrifying legal maneuver. That afternoon, completely bypassing standard judicial timelines, DeAndre filed an emergency ex parte medical conservatorship with the county court. He submitted a heavily fabricated petition claiming my billboard stunt was undeniable proof of a severe paranoid psychotic break. He demanded an immediate court order to strip me of my legal autonomy and silence my testimony permanently. My attorney called me just as the sun set, his voice tight with genuine alarm. The judge had reviewed their desperate emotional plea and granted an emergency hearing for the very next morning. The morning sun barely crested the city skyline when I stepped into the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the county family court. The emergency ex parte conservatorship hearing was not a standard legal proceeding. It was a rapid, brutal mechanism designed to strip a human being of their fundamental autonomy in a matter of hours. If the presiding judge believed the fabricated, malicious narrative DeAndre had submitted the previous night, I would instantly lose my legal right to sign a check, hire an attorney, or even choose where I lived. DeAndre and Meredith were demanding the court grant them immediate unilateral control over my entire estate and my physical person. They wanted to officially declare me a ward of the state under their strict supervision. The gravity of the threat hung in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor outside the courtroom. I knew exactly what they were attempting to execute. They could not defeat my forensic accountants or outmaneuver my legal defenses in a standard commercial lawsuit. Therefore, they decided to completely circumvent the corporate justice system by attacking my basic human competence. They were going to stand in front of a judge and argue that my highly strategic, meticulous dismantling of their fraudulent lifestyle was actually the undeniable proof of a severe paranoid psychotic break. They intended to twist my defensive countermeasures into symptoms of aggressive dementia. As I waited on the wooden bench outside the double doors, I understood the terrifying reality of the judicial system. Judges are human beings, and human beings can be manipulated by a masterful, tear-filled performance. If DeAndre managed to sell his fabricated grief, I would walk out of this building in the custody of Adult Protective Services, stripped of the very wealth I bled to build. I did not allow a single ounce of fear to penetrate my mind. I smoothed the lapels of my finest tailored charcoal suit and adjusted my silk tie. I looked down at the heavy vintage leather briefcase resting securely between my work boots. I had not spent the previous night pacing the floors in a panic or frantically calling relatives for moral support. I had spent the entire evening sitting at my kitchen island with Mr. Harding, systematically organizing our defensive arsenal into irrefutable, undeniable categories of hard evidence. My briefcase contained the original notarized psychiatric evaluation confirming my elite cognitive function. It held the certified commercial fraud reports detailing the forged warehouse deed. It secured the high-definition flash drives holding the unedited security footage of their extortion attempts. Most importantly, it contained the verified auction house receipt bearing Meredith's signature for Lucille's stolen diamond brooch. I did not need to rely on dramatic tears or emotional pleas to secure my freedom. I brought an impenetrable fortress of verified data. Mr. Harding arrived exactly 15 minutes before the hearing commenced. He wore a crisp navy suit and carried himself with the predatory, calculated calm of a man who knew he held the winning hand. We did not exchange worried glances or offer each other false reassurances. He simply tapped his knuckles against my briefcase and nodded. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open. A bailiff called my name, instructing all parties to enter and take their respective seats. I walked down the center aisle with a perfectly rigid posture. I kept my chin high and my shoulders broad. I sat down at the defense table and placed my leather briefcase squarely on the polished wood. Directly across the aisle, DeAndre and Meredith sat at the plaintiff's table. They had dressed specifically for their theatrical roles. DeAndre wore a wrinkled, oversized sweater, deliberately trying to look exhausted and thoroughly defeated. Meredith wore no makeup, her hair pulled back tightly to emphasize the dark circles under her eyes. They were actively playing the part of traumatized, desperate children forced to make a tragic medical decision for a violent, unruly parent. I looked directly at my son. He refused to meet my gaze, staring intently at his legal pad instead. The presiding judge, a stern woman with a reputation for moving quickly through emergency dockets, called the court to order. She instructed DeAndre to take the witness stand and state his case for the immediate medical conservatorship. My son walked slowly to the wooden box, raised his right hand, and swore an oath to tell the truth. The moment he sat down, the theatrical performance began. DeAndre delivered an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation. His voice trembled flawlessly as he answered his attorney's guiding questions. He claimed that my mental health had rapidly and violently deteriorated over the past month. He told the judge that I was suffering from severe paranoia, causing me to isolate myself from the family that deeply loved me. He wept openly, wiping genuine tears from his cheeks as he described the digital billboard broadcast at the country club. DeAndre completely twisted the narrative, claiming that only a man suffering from a profound, terrifying psychotic break would spend thousands of dollars to publicly humiliate his own flesh and blood with heavily doctored security footage. He painted himself as a devoted, loving son who was simply trying to protect his sick father from destroying his own legacy. He begged the judge to grant him immediate power of attorney so he could place me in a secure, specialized psychiatric facility to receive the urgent medical intervention I supposedly needed. He sobbed into a tissue, portraying me as a violent, unpredictable monster who posed an immediate physical threat to his wife and his innocent child. He stated my decision to cancel his mortgage transfer was the first symptom of a diseased mind. I watched the judge lean forward, her expression softening with visible sympathy. She was buying every single word of his fabricated grief. DeAndre's tears were actively swaying the pendulum of justice in his favor. The plaintiff's attorney finished his direct examination, leaving the courtroom in a heavy, sympathetic silence. DeAndre kept his head bowed, dabbing his eyes with a crumpled tissue, looking exactly like a shattered son fulfilling a tragic duty. The judge turned her attention toward the defense table. She asked if my counsel had any questions for the witness before she made her preliminary ruling on my mental competence. Mr. Harding did not hesitate for a single second. He stood up from his leather chair, buttoned his suit jacket, and picked up a thick, meticulously tabbed legal folder from my briefcase. He did not look sympathetic, and he certainly did not look intimidated by the emotional display. He walked confidently to the center of the courtroom, his eyes locked dead onto DeAndre. The time for silent observation was officially over. The cross-examination was about to begin. Mr. Harding stood in the exact center of the courtroom with his polished dress shoes planted firmly on the hardwood floor. He did not offer a polite introductory greeting to the weeping man in the witness box. He did not ask DeAndre how his feelings were hurt on Christmas Eve or question the emotional toll of the digital billboard broadcast. He bypassed the theatrical performance entirely. Mr. Harding operated strictly in the realm of irrefutable data and cold mathematics. He opened the thick legal folder and extracted a single sheet of paper. He asked DeAndre to clearly state his occupation for the official court record. DeAndre sniffled, wiping a fabricated tear from his cheek, and stated he was a senior acquisitions manager for a major corporate firm. Mr. Harding nodded slowly. He pointed out that a senior acquisitions manager is a highly educated financial professional who deals with multi-million-dollar commercial contracts every single day. DeAndre agreed cautiously, assuming his prestigious job title made him look responsible and trustworthy to the presiding judge. That arrogant assumption was his fatal mistake. Mr. Harding immediately established that DeAndre possessed a deep, sophisticated understanding of property law and corporate asset transfers. He established that DeAndre was not a confused, grieving son making desperate choices. He was a calculated financial predator. Mr. Harding approached the bench and handed the judge a certified copy of the forensic fraud report. She adjusted her reading glasses and scrutinized the heavy legal seal. He then handed an identical copy directly to DeAndre in the witness box. He instructed my son to read the title of the document aloud for the court reporter. The heavy, suffocating tension in the room instantly shifted. DeAndre looked down at the paper and the color rapidly drained from his face. The emotional facade cracked completely under the weight of the physical evidence. Mr. Harding loudly identified the document as a certified forensic analysis of a forged commercial property deed. He explained to the judge that just 3 weeks prior, DeAndre and his wife utilized a fraudulent power of attorney to illegally transfer the unencumbered ownership of my commercial warehouse into a hidden shell company. DeAndre gripped the edges of the witness stand, his knuckles turning stark white. He stammered frantically, claiming the warehouse transfer was an early inheritance gift that I had willingly authorized. Mr. Harding did not let the lie breathe for a single second. He directed the judge to page 4 of the report, highlighting the 30 years of my authentic notarized signatures compared directly to the clumsy forgery on the deed. He explicitly noted that a man suffering from severe cognitive decline does not possess the mental capacity to execute a complex commercial real estate transfer to a shell company. Mr. Harding then pulled out a second document from his leather briefcase. He presented the official police report from the midnight intrusion at my home. He asked DeAndre to explain why a deeply concerned son would shatter a reinforced kitchen door with a heavy steel crowbar at 2 o'clock in the morning. DeAndre sweat profusely under the harsh courtroom lights. He desperately claimed he was simply trying to retrieve his childhood belongings because I had aggressively locked him out of the house. Mr. Harding let out a sharp, abrasive laugh. He pointed out that childhood belongings are generally stored in cardboard boxes in the attic, not inside a fireproof wall safe containing unregistered bearer bonds. He noted that crowbars are the preferred tools of desperate felons, not sentimental children. Finally, Mr. Harding pulled a small digital audio player from his pocket. He requested permission to submit an authenticated audio recording into evidence. The judge granted the request instantly. Mr. Harding pressed the play button. The crisp, high-definition audio of the porch ambush filled the entire courtroom. DeAndre's own voice echoed off the wooden walls, explicitly outlining his malicious plan to hire aggressive medical experts, declare me legally incompetent, and lock me inside a state-run nursing home so he could seize my commercial assets. The recording clearly demonstrated that DeAndre was entirely motivated by the impending default on his luxury estate mortgage rather than any genuine medical concern. The audio recording finished playing, leaving a heavy, paralyzing silence in its wake. The judge leaned back in her high leather chair, her expression hardening into absolute stone. The profound sympathy she had previously displayed for DeAndre completely evaporated in a matter of seconds. She looked down at the weeping man in the witness box with pure, unadulterated disgust. She did not see a traumatized son trying to protect his sick father. She saw a ruthless, calculating corporate fraudster attempting to weaponize the judicial system to execute a massive financial heist. The judge leaned forward and spoke directly to DeAndre. Her voice carried the sharp, terrifying authority of a magistrate who realized she was being actively manipulated in her own courtroom. She demanded DeAndre explain the glaring contradictions in his testimony. She asked how he could simultaneously claim I was a violent, unpredictable monster suffering from severe dementia, while also claiming I possessed the lucid mental capacity to legally gift him a $3 million commercial warehouse. She informed him that perjury is a severe felony, and attempting to use a medical conservatorship as a weapon for corporate theft is a despicable abuse of the court's time. DeAndre completely unraveled under her furious scrutiny. He opened his mouth, but no coherent words came out. He began to stutter wildly, contradicting his own established timeline. He tried to blame the shell company entirely on his wife Meredith, claiming she handled all the legal paperwork without his full understanding. He then attempted to backtrack, blaming his extreme financial stress for the midnight burglary. The judge raised her hand, demanding he stop speaking immediately. She stated that extreme financial stress does not legally justify armed burglary, forgery, or the malicious filing of a fraudulent medical conservatorship. DeAndre shrank back into the wooden chair, completely destroyed. His velvet blazer looked utterly ridiculous on a man whose entire arrogant existence had just been systematically dismantled by hard, undeniable facts. The narrative he spent days crafting was entirely dead. Mr. Harding stood near the plaintiff's table, looking down at the ruined man in the witness box. He informed the judge that he had absolutely no further questions for this thoroughly discredited witness. The judge ordered DeAndre to step down from the stand. DeAndre stood up, his legs trembling visibly, and stumbled back to his seat next to his defense attorney. He buried his face in his hands, realizing he had just confessed to multiple federal felonies under oath on the public record. However, the legal execution was not quite finished. The trap we set required one final devastating trigger to ensure total victory. Mr. Harding turned his attention away from my son and looked directly toward the gallery benches. He locked eyes with Meredith, who was sitting rigidly in the second row, desperately trying to make herself look invisible among the spectators. Meredith's face drained of all color as she realized she could not escape the blast radius of her husband's implosion. Mr. Harding addressed the judge and formally called my daughter-in-law to the witness stand. He reached into his suit jacket and held the elite auction house receipt tightly in his right hand. Meredith walked slowly toward the witness box. Her designer heels clicked against the hardwood floor, but the confident, arrogant stride she displayed at the country club was entirely gone. She sat down and placed her trembling hands in her lap. The court clerk administered the oath. She swore to tell the whole truth, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Harding approached the stand. He did not waste time with pleasantries or gentle inquiries. He placed the certified auction house receipt directly on the wooden ledge in front of her. He asked Meredith to identify the document for the court. She stared at the paper as if it were a live grenade. The color drained completely from her face. Mr. Harding instructed her to read the signature at the bottom line for the official court record. Meredith opened her mouth, but her throat seized. Mr. Harding raised his voice so the entire gallery could hear. I explicitly identified the document as a consignment receipt for a stolen heirloom diamond brooch belonging to my late wife, Lucille. He informed the judge that the serial number on the receipt perfectly matched the missing item listed on the fraudulent will DeAndre had submitted to the court. Mr. Harding then reminded Meredith that she was currently sitting under oath. He warned her that lying about the origin of the signature would result in an immediate federal perjury charge on top of the impending indictment for grand larceny. The sterile courtroom air grew incredibly heavy. Meredith looked frantically toward the plaintiff's table, desperately seeking a lifeline from her husband. DeAndre sat frozen, staring at the receipt with wide, terrified eyes. He had absolutely no idea she had fenced the stolen diamond using her own legal name. The trap was locked. She had to make a choice. Meredith attempted to salvage her pristine image with a blatant, desperate lie. She claimed she had no idea the diamond brooch was stolen property. She testified that she believed it was a generous family gift intended to help fund her lifestyle. Mr. Harding immediately dismantled her perjury. He produced the accompanying police report I filed at the precinct, highlighting the precise date the jewelry went missing from Lucille's hospice room. He noted that the theft occurred while Lucille was actively dying of pancreatic cancer, a time when Meredith was supposedly visiting the house to offer comfort and support. He pointed out that receiving a legitimate family gift does not require a secret cash-only transaction at a high-end pawnbroker across town. The judge leaned over the bench, glaring down at Meredith with absolute disdain. She warned the witness that continuing to perjure herself in a court of law would guarantee a maximum prison sentence without any possibility of a plea deal. The immediate threat of wearing a standard prison jumpsuit instead of designer silk broke Meredith completely. Her deeply ingrained survival instinct overrode any lingering loyalty to her marriage. She realized she was sinking rapidly, and she decided to use her husband as a flotation device. Meredith burst into frantic theatrical tears and pointed a shaking finger directly at DeAndre. She testified that DeAndre was the sole mastermind behind the entire criminal enterprise. She claimed her husband forced her to sell the stolen diamond to cover his massive hidden commercial debts. She swore under oath that DeAndre meticulously forged my signature on the commercial warehouse deed because he was desperate to appease the wealthy corporate developers. She painted herself as a terrified, manipulated wife who merely followed the aggressive financial demands of an abusive husband. She threw DeAndre entirely under the bus, explicitly outlining how he drafted the fake medical conservatorship petition to silence me before the bank fraud investigators closed in. She sacrificed her marriage on the public record to secure her own legal immunity. I watched her weep on the stand, feeling zero pity for either of them. Their alliance was forged purely from greed, and it collapsed the exact moment the money vanished. DeAndre erupted from his chair at the plaintiff's table. The profound betrayal from his own wife shattered the last remaining fraction of his sanity. He screamed at the top of his lungs, calling Meredith a parasitic thief and a pathological liar. His voice cracked with pure, unadulterated fury as he yelled that the entire warehouse scheme was her idea to maintain her fabricated country club status. He roared that she was the one who stole the diamond brooch from his dying mother's bedroom while he was downstairs making tea. DeAndre did not stop at verbal accusations. The sheer rage of losing his wealth, his career, and now his freedom propelled him into a violent physical outburst. He shoved the heavy wooden defense table aside, knocking legal binders and glass water pitchers onto the floor. The glass shattered loudly across the courtroom tile. He lunged across the center aisle of the courtroom, sprinting directly toward the witness stand with his hands outstretched like claws. He intended to physically attack his wife right in front of the presiding magistrate. The courtroom descended into absolute chaos. Meredith shrieked and recoiled into the corner of the wooden box, shielding her face with her arms. The two armed bailiffs stationed near the gallery reacted with immediate brutal efficiency. They intercepted DeAndre before he could reach the wooden steps of the stand. The larger bailiff grabbed DeAndre by the collar of his velvet blazer and forcefully slammed him face first into the hardwood floor. The second officer dropped his knee squarely into the center of DeAndre's back, pinning him securely against the ground. DeAndre thrashed wildly, kicking his expensive shoes against the wooden benches, completely blinded by his catastrophic downfall. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed over his frantic, desperate sobbing. The arrogant man who believed he was destined for high society greatness was now a restrained, weeping felon lying in the dirt of a county courtroom. The presiding judge stood up from her high leather chair, her face flushed with unprecedented anger. She grabbed her heavy wooden gavel and slammed it violently against the sounding block. The sharp cracking noise cut through the chaotic shouting of the courtroom like a rifle shot. She demanded absolute order and instructed the bailiffs to keep DeAndre pinned firmly to the floor. The judge looked down at the ruined, treacherous couple with a gaze of pure judicial wrath. She had witnessed enough perjury, forgery, and family betrayal to make her final, unyielding decision. She ordered the court reporter to mark the session, ready for the official ruling. The fraudulent medical conservatorship petition was completely dead. The time for the ultimate verdict had arrived. The sharp crack of the wooden gavel echoed through the cavernous courtroom like a gunshot. The presiding judge stood behind her elevated mahogany bench, her face flushed with pure judicial wrath. She ordered the bailiffs to haul DeAndre up from the hardwood floor, but explicitly commanded them to keep the heavy steel handcuffs secured tightly around his wrists. DeAndre stood trembling, his velvet blazer torn and covered in courtroom dust, a physical manifestation of his shattered arrogance. The judge stared down at the ruined couple with a gaze devoid of any legal neutrality. It was the look of a magistrate who had just witnessed a profoundly despicable abuse of her courtroom. She addressed the emergency ex parte medical conservatorship petition lying on her desk. She did not merely deny their request. She systematically shredded their entire fabricated narrative for the public record. The judge declared the petition a malicious, calculated weapon of financial extortion designed specifically to strip a perfectly lucid, intelligent man of his fundamental human rights. She stated that my meticulously documented defense proved beyond a shadow of a legal doubt that my cognitive function was entirely superior to the two reckless fraudsters attempting to silence me. She highlighted that attempting to disguise corporate theft as elder care was the most repulsive act she had seen during her tenure on the bench. The judge formally dismissed the medical conservatorship petition with extreme prejudice, guaranteeing they could never file it again. She declared that I retained absolute unyielding autonomy over my physical person and my vast commercial estate. DeAndre slumped forward against the grip of the bailiffs, realizing his final desperate gambit to seize my wealth had just catastrophically failed. The judge did not stop at simply dismissing the fraudulent medical petition. She sat back down in her high leather chair and turned her furious attention directly to the court clerk. She ordered the immediate drafting of a bench warrant for multiple severe felonies. She looked at DeAndre and explicitly outlined his crimes for the official public record. She cited the highly sophisticated forgery of my commercial warehouse deed, the armed midnight burglary at my private residence, and the malicious filing of a fabricated medical document. She then turned her piercing gaze toward Meredith, who was still cowering in the witness box. Meredith attempted to plead for leniency, claiming her testimony against DeAndre proved her willingness to cooperate with the court. The judge instantly silenced her with a raised hand. She informed my daughter-in-law that throwing a co-conspirator under the bus to save her own skin did not erase the undeniable fact that she had just committed blatant perjury under oath. The judge cited the certified auction house receipt provided by Mr. Harding, confirming Meredith had committed felony grand larceny by stealing a dying woman's diamond brooch. The judge commended Mr. Harding and me for our meticulous ironclad record-keeping. She stated that my strategy of silent, airtight documentation had perfectly exposed a pair of ruthless predators who believed their superficial high society status made them immune to the rule of law. She officially ordered the bailiffs to place Meredith under immediate arrest. A female court officer approached the witness box, unclipped a pair of steel handcuffs from her utility belt, and instructed Meredith to place her hands behind her back. Meredith let out a sharp, breathless gasp of pure horror. The pristine, elite socialite was physically forced out of the wooden stand and restrained like a common street criminal. The arrogant couple who had mocked my working-class boots on Christmas Eve were now standing on opposite sides of the courtroom, both bound in heavy steel chains, facing decades in a federal penitentiary. I sat at the defense table with my hands folded neatly in front of me. I felt no sorrow. I felt no regret. I simply watched the brutal, efficient machinery of the criminal justice system crush the parasites who tried to bleed me dry. As the bailiffs prepared to march the restrained couple out of the courtroom and down into the holding cells, Meredith requested a brief moment to retrieve a personal item from her designer handbag resting on the plaintiff's table. The judge granted the request, instructing the female officer to carefully retrieve the bag. The officer unzipped the leather purse and allowed Meredith to awkwardly reach inside with her cuffed hands. Meredith did not pull out a tissue to dry her tears. She did not reach for her smartphone to call her wealthy parents, knowing they had already permanently disowned her. She extracted a thickly folded, officially stamped legal document. She marched stiffly across the center aisle of the courtroom, stopping directly in front of her bleeding, trembling husband. DeAndre looked up at her, expecting a final word of solidarity or a whispered promise to coordinate their legal defense. Meredith provided neither. She shoved the heavy document squarely into his chest. The paper fell to the floor, unfolding just enough to reveal the bold, printed header. It was a formal petition for an immediate contested divorce. Meredith looked at DeAndre with eyes completely devoid of warmth or loyalty. She loudly blamed him for dragging her pristine reputation into a low-class, humiliating criminal scandal. She stated that his profound financial incompetence and his cowardly inability to manipulate his own father had cost her everything she valued in life. She officially abandoned him in his absolute darkest moments, severing their toxic marriage right there on the polished courtroom tiles. DeAndre spat back at her, his voice cracking with pure venom. He called her a parasitic thief who drained his accounts to buy designer shoes. He screamed that he was glad she was going to a federal women's prison because she would finally experience a world she could not control with stolen money. Their alliance, built entirely on vanity and my stolen wealth, violently cannibalized itself. I watched them tear each other apart, completely satisfied that their punishment was entirely self-inflicted. The bailiffs forcefully separated the screaming couple, dragging them through the heavy wooden side doors toward the subterranean holding cells. Their vicious insults faded into the sterile corridors of the courthouse. The battle was officially over. I picked up my vintage leather briefcase, shook Mr. Harding's hand, and walked out into the crisp, bright morning air. I turned on my smartphone as I reached my 10-year-old sedan. A high-priority automated email alert from the Central Banking Authority instantly populated on my screen. The lengthy legal grace period had officially expired. The massive financial institution had just finalized the total foreclosure on DeAndre's luxury suburban mansion. The bank was executing the immediate seizure of the property to cover the fraudulent commercial loans. Across town, 3 heavy county sheriff cruisers were aggressively pulling into the manicured driveway of the estate, preparing to physically throw my son's remaining possessions out onto the freezing wet street. The county sheriffs did not care about DeAndre's velvet blazers or his formerly prestigious corporate titles. They arrived at the sprawling suburban estate precisely at 8 o'clock in the morning with heavy tactical boots and a stack of court-ordered eviction mandates. The massive financial institution had finalized the absolute foreclosure of the property. DeAndre stood in the grand marble foyer completely alone. Meredith had already vanished, taking her designer luggage and leaving him to face the devastating reality of his massive federal fraud. The lead sheriff handed DeAndre a single heavy cardboard box and instructed him to pack his immediate personal necessities. They gave him exactly 15 minutes to vacate the premises before they physically removed him. The elite neighbors, the very people DeAndre had sacrificed his family to impress, stood on their manicured lawns watching the spectacle with undisguised contempt. They recorded his absolute ruin on their smartphones, ensuring his high society humiliation was completely finalized. The sheriffs escorted him out the front door and locked the heavy oak entrance behind him. DeAndre stood on the pristine concrete porch where he had banished me on Christmas Eve. He looked down at the exact spot where I had gently placed the wooden fire truck for his son. He had absolutely no money to secure a hotel room. He possessed zero access to his frozen bank accounts. He did not have a wife to manipulate or a corporate job to leverage. His expensive sports car was sitting in a county police impound lot. He was officially stripped of every single fraudulent asset he had stolen to build his fake empire. He was a disgraced, unemployed felon standing on a freezing suburban curb with absolutely nowhere to go. A brutal, freezing winter rain began to fall as DeAndre took his first steps away from the foreclosed mansion. He slung a cheap canvas duffel bag over his shoulder. The expensive leather luggage he preferred had been seized by the bankruptcy liquidators to cover his massive debts. He had to walk. The premium transit cards in his wallet were entirely deactivated, and he did not possess a single dollar of physical cash to hire a cab. He walked for miles across the sprawling city layout, traversing the exact commercial districts he used to look down upon from the windows of high-rise corporate boardrooms. The freezing rain soaked entirely through his thin designer coat, chilling his bones and ruining his expensive Italian shoes with thick working-class mud. I watched his painful, agonizing journey through the lens of the high-definition security cameras I had mounted across my property. I sat in my warm, quiet kitchen drinking a fresh cup of black coffee. I tracked his slow, pathetic approach down my street. The arrogant executive who had attempted to lock me inside a state-run nursing home was now dragging his feet through icy puddles just to find a place to hide from the elements. He arrived at my driveway just as the afternoon sky turned a dark, bruised purple. He did not march up to my door with the aggressive, entitled stride he displayed during his initial ambush. He stumbled up the concrete steps, shivering violently, his shoulders hunched in total defeat. He raised a shaking hand and knocked weakly against the solid oak wood. He was a completely broken man returning to the very foundation he had aggressively tried to demolish. He expected the father he betrayed to rescue him from the cold consequences of his own severe criminality. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. I did not feel a single ounce of triumph or paternal pity. I felt the heavy, resolute calm of a master welder preparing to finalize a critical structural repair. The toxic debris had to be cleared before any new foundation could be laid. I walked slowly to the entryway and unlatched the heavy deadbolt. I pulled the handle, stepping into the biting wind to confront the product of my greatest failure. I was entirely prepared to look my ruined son in the eye and deliver his ultimate reality check. I pulled the front door open, but I deliberately planted my heavy work boots squarely on the threshold. I utilized my broad frame to completely block the entrance, sealing the warmth of my home away from the freezing wind. DeAndre looked up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes. Rainwater dripped from his chin onto his ruined designer collar. He collapsed onto his knees on the wet concrete mat, dropping his duffel bag into a shallow puddle. He began to weep, hysterically begging me for mercy. He cried out that he had finally learned his lesson, claiming the public humiliation and the total loss of his wealth had cured his arrogance. He pleaded for a warm place to sleep, suggesting I let him stay in the unfinished basement just until he could find a menial job. He swore he would spend the rest of his life working to repay the severe financial and emotional damage he had inflicted upon me. I looked down at the sobbing man kneeling in the freezing rain. I saw straight through his desperate, theatrical tears. I informed my son that he was not genuinely remorseful for his profound betrayal. I stated clearly that he was only weeping because he had catastrophically lost his fraudulent empire. He was sorry that Mr. Harding's forensic accountants had easily uncovered his forged warehouse deed. He was deeply regretful that the judge had seen through his fabricated medical conservatorship. He was mourning his frozen bank accounts and his shattered country club reputation, not the violent destruction of his family. I told him that an authentic apology requires genuine accountability, and he was simply looking for a convenient shelter to hide from his impending federal indictment. I refused to let my home become a sanctuary for an unrepentant felon. I reminded him that he was the one who explicitly declared me a dangerous burden. I stated that shielding him from the brutal storm he created would only teach him how to successfully manipulate my empathy. His tears were entirely useless against my logic. DeAndre clutched his hands together, shivering violently against the bitter winter wind. He begged me to show him the unconditional grace a father owes his child. I informed him that grace is strictly reserved for men who possess actual integrity. I reached inside the interior pocket of my warm canvas jacket. I bypassed the lingering remnants of parental softness entirely. I extracted a single heavily stipulated legal document drafted meticulously by Mr. Harding. It was encased inside a clear plastic sleeve to protect the ink from the freezing rain. I held the document out toward my shivering son, offering him one final brutal choice. This paper represented the absolute end of his entitlement and the grueling beginning of his accountability. He stared at the plastic sleeve, realizing his high society charade was officially over. He was about to discover the agonizing price of his freedom. The toxic cord connecting me to my son was permanently severed. I watched DeAndre disappear into the freezing rain, knowing he was finally facing the brutal reality of the working-class life he had mocked for so long. However, my strategic dismantling of their fraudulent empire was not completely finished. I still had one critical, innocent life to secure from the devastating fallout of their criminal collapse. My grandson Evan was currently in the sole custody of a desperate, panicked felon. Meredith had watched her elite social standing shatter on a 50-foot digital billboard in front of her high society peers. She had publicly perjured herself in a county courtroom to save her own skin. She knew the district attorney was aggressively processing the felony grand larceny indictment for stealing Lucille's diamond brooch. Facing the absolute certainty of a lengthy sentence in a federal women's penitentiary, Meredith decided to execute a cowardly, catastrophic escape plan. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I received a highly urgent automated alert from the private investigator I had kept on retainer. The investigator had been strictly monitoring Meredith's movements since the eviction. He reported that Meredith had hastily packed a rented moving van outside her temporary low-income apartment. She was not preparing to relocate across town. She was actively loading my 6-year-old grandson into the passenger seat, preparing to flee the state jurisdiction entirely to evade her impending criminal arrest. She intended to drag Evan into the life of a fugitive, using her own child as a human shield to delay her inevitable imprisonment. She believed she could simply cross the state line and disappear before the legal system processed her arrest warrant. She was catastrophically mistaken. I did not waste a single second panicking over her desperate flight risk. I immediately dialed Mr. Harding's direct line and informed him of the active flight situation. I instructed him to weaponize the grand larceny charges we had already filed at the local precinct to halt her escape. Mr. Harding operated with terrifying lethal efficiency. He immediately contacted the lead detective assigned to the Property Crimes Division and provided the live real-time GPS coordinates transmitted by my private investigator. Flight to avoid felony prosecution instantly elevates a suspect's threat level. The local precinct rapidly coordinated with the State Highway Patrol to intercept the vehicle. Meredith did not even make it to the interstate on-ramp. 4 heavily armed state trooper vehicles intercepted her rented moving van less than 5 miles from her apartment complex. They executed a felony traffic stop, boxing her vehicle in completely against the concrete median. The troopers drew their weapons, ordered Meredith to step out of the cab, and arrested her right there on the freezing asphalt. They secured Evan safely in the back of a warm patrol cruiser, shielding him from the traumatic spectacle of his mother being handcuffed, and read her Miranda rights. Mr. Harding and I arrived at the local precinct holding facility less than an hour later. We did not come to negotiate a plea deal. We came to dictate the absolute terms of her surrender. We sat across from Meredith in a sterile concrete interrogation room. She wore a bright orange county jumpsuit, her designer aesthetic permanently replaced by the harsh, humiliating reality of the criminal justice system. I placed the original signed auction house receipt for Lucille's stolen diamond brooch on the metal table. Mr. Harding placed the raw, unedited security footage of her emotional abuse on top of it. I informed my disgraced daughter-in-law that her desperate attempt to flee the state had just guaranteed her a maximum prison sentence without any possibility of early parole. However, I offered her a singular non-negotiable lifeline. I demanded she immediately sign a voluntary, irrevocable surrender of her parental rights. I stated that if she willingly transferred full physical and legal custody of my grandson to me right now, Mr. Harding would advise the district attorney not to pursue additional federal kidnapping charges for attempting to transport a minor across state lines while fleeing an active felony warrant. Meredith stared at the ironclad legal documents resting on the cold metal table. She looked at my unyielding expression and realized her high society manipulation tactics were completely useless inside a concrete police interrogation room. She possessed zero financial resources to hire a competent defense attorney. Her wealthy parents had permanently disowned her after discovering the massive embezzlement of their retirement trust. Her husband was currently living in a working men's boarding house across town, stripped of his corporate career. She was entirely isolated, facing decades in a federal penitentiary with no allies left to exploit. The crushing weight of her absolute ruin finally broke her stubborn pride. With trembling, handcuffed hands, she picked up the cheap plastic pen provided by the detective and signed the irrevocable surrender of her parental rights. She legally relinquished all claims to her son, effectively trading his future for a slightly reduced prison sentence. She handed the document back to Mr. Harding and wept silently into her palms. I did not offer her a single word of comfort or maternal forgiveness. I took the signed paperwork and walked out of the interrogation room, leaving her to face the brutal consequences of her profound greed alone. Mr. Harding immediately filed the signed surrender with the county family court. Given the severity of her active felony charges, her verified attempt to flee the jurisdiction, and the undeniable video evidence of her severe emotional instability, the presiding judge expedited the guardianship transition. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I stood before the magistrate and was officially granted full permanent legal and physical custody of my grandson. I walked out of the courthouse holding Evan's small hand securely in mine. I had successfully rescued the boy from the toxic, superficial environment that had entirely poisoned his father. Evan would not grow up worshiping luxury sports cars or prioritizing social status over basic human decency. He would grow up in a quiet, stable home built on discipline, honesty, and actual hard work. I drove my 10-year-old sedan back to my quiet neighborhood with my grandson sitting safely in the passenger seat. The massive threat against my family had been systematically dismantled and entirely neutralized. DeAndre was banished to the grueling reality of manual labor. Meredith was locked securely inside a county jail cell awaiting her felony trial. My home was peaceful, and my legacy was finally secure from entitled predators. However, I still retained the vast liquid fortune generated from the early sale of my commercial real estate portfolio. I possessed millions of dollars sitting untouched in my secure private accounts. I refused to let that massive wealth rot in a bank vault waiting for another generation of arrogant heirs to fight over it. I needed to ensure my money served a permanent, unbreakable purpose. I watched DeAndre walk away into the freezing winter storm, fully aware that my son was finally enduring the harsh reality he deserved. But my strategic dismantling of their fraudulent empire was not completely finished. I still had one critical, innocent life to secure from the devastating fallout of their criminal collapse. My grandson Evan was currently in the sole custody of a desperate, panicked felon. Meredith had watched her elite social standing shatter on a 50-foot digital billboard in front of her high society peers. She had publicly perjured herself in a county courtroom to save her own skin. She knew the district attorney was aggressively processing the felony grand larceny indictment for stealing Lucille's diamond brooch. Facing the absolute certainty of a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary, Meredith decided to execute a cowardly, catastrophic escape plan. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I received a highly urgent, automated alert from the private investigator I had kept on retainer. The investigator had been strictly monitoring Meredith's movements since her eviction from the suburban mansion. He reported that Meredith had hastily packed a rented moving van outside her temporary low-income apartment. She was not preparing to relocate across town to rebuild her life. She was actively loading my 6-year-old grandson into the passenger seat, preparing to flee the state jurisdiction entirely to evade her impending criminal arrest. She intended to drag Evan into the life of a fugitive, using her own child as a human shield to delay her inevitable imprisonment. She believed she could simply cross the state line and disappear into the rural Midwest before the legal system processed her arrest warrant. She was catastrophically mistaken. I did not waste a single second panicking over her desperate flight risk. I immediately dialed Mr. Harding's direct line and informed him of the active flight situation regarding my grandson. I instructed him to weaponize the grand larceny charges we had already filed at the local precinct to halt her escape before she reached the interstate. Mr. Harding operated with terrifying lethal efficiency. He immediately contacted the lead detective assigned to the Property Crimes Division and provided the live real-time GPS coordinates transmitted by my private investigator. Flight to avoid felony prosecution instantly elevates a suspect's threat level from a standard white-collar crime to a high-priority tactical pursuit. The local precinct rapidly coordinated with the State Highway Patrol to intercept the vehicle. Meredith did not even make it to the interstate on-ramp. 4 heavily armed state trooper vehicles intercepted her rented moving van less than 5 miles from her apartment complex. They executed a felony traffic stop, boxing her vehicle in completely against the concrete median of the highway. The troopers drew their weapons, ordered Meredith to step out of the cab with her hands raised, and arrested her right there on the freezing asphalt. They secured Evan safely in the back of a warm patrol cruiser, shielding him from the traumatic spectacle of his mother being handcuffed, and read her Miranda rights. Mr. Harding and I arrived at the local precinct holding facility less than an hour later. We did not come to negotiate a plea deal with a desperate fugitive. We came to dictate the absolute terms of her unconditional surrender. We sat across from Meredith in a sterile concrete interrogation room. She wore a bright orange county jumpsuit, her designer aesthetic permanently replaced by the harsh, humiliating reality of the criminal justice system. I placed the original signed auction house receipt for Lucille's stolen diamond brooch squarely on the metal table. Mr. Harding placed the raw, unedited security footage of her emotional abuse on top of it. I informed my disgraced daughter-in-law that her desperate attempt to flee the state had just guaranteed her a maximum prison sentence without any possibility of early parole. However, I offered her a singular, non-negotiable lifeline. I demanded she immediately sign a voluntary, irrevocable surrender of her parental rights. I stated that if she willingly transferred full physical and legal custody of my grandson to me right now, Mr. Harding would advise the district attorney not to pursue additional federal kidnapping charges for attempting to transport a minor across state lines while fleeing an active felony warrant. Meredith stared at the ironclad legal documents resting on the cold metal table. She looked at my unyielding expression and realized her high society manipulation tactics were completely useless inside a concrete police interrogation room. She possessed zero financial resources to hire a competent defense attorney. Her wealthy parents had permanently disowned her after discovering the massive embezzlement of their retirement trust. Her husband was currently living in a working men's boarding house across town, entirely stripped of his corporate career and completely alienated from her. She was entirely isolated, facing decades in a state penitentiary with no allies left to exploit. The crushing weight of her absolute ruin finally broke her stubborn pride. With trembling, handcuffed hands, she picked up the cheap plastic pen provided by the detective and signed the irrevocable surrender of her parental rights. She legally relinquished all claims to her son, effectively trading his future for a slightly reduced prison sentence. She handed the document back to Mr. Harding and wept silently into her palms. I did not offer her a single word of comfort or maternal forgiveness. I took the signed paperwork and walked out of the interrogation room, leaving her to face the brutal consequences of her profound greed alone. Mr. Harding immediately filed the signed surrender with the county family court. Given the severity of her active felony charges, her verified attempt to flee the jurisdiction, and the undeniable video evidence of her severe emotional instability, the presiding judge expedited the guardianship transition without any hesitation. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I stood before the magistrate and was officially granted full, permanent legal and physical custody of my grandson. I walked out of the courthouse holding Evan's small hand securely in mine. I had successfully rescued the boy from the toxic, superficial environment that had entirely poisoned his father. Evan would not grow up worshiping luxury sports cars or prioritizing social status over basic human decency. He would grow up in a quiet, stable home built on discipline, honesty, and actual hard work. I drove my 10-year-old sedan back to my quiet neighborhood with my grandson sitting safely in the passenger seat. The massive threat against my family had been systematically dismantled and entirely neutralized. DeAndre was banished to the grueling reality of manual labor. Meredith was locked securely inside a county jail cell awaiting her felony trial. My home was peaceful, and my legacy was finally secure from entitled predators. However, I still retained the vast liquid fortune generated from the early sale of my commercial real estate portfolio. I possessed millions of dollars sitting untouched in my secure private accounts. I refused to let that massive wealth rot in a bank vault waiting for another generation of arrogant heirs to fight over it. I needed to ensure my money served a permanent, unbreakable purpose that honored the sacrifices Lucille and I made. It had been exactly 3 weeks since the dramatic implosion of Meredith's fraudulent shell company. I was sitting at the polished mahogany table in Mr. Harding's downtown office holding a fresh cup of black coffee. The heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open and the lead corporate developer walked inside. This was the same silver-haired executive who had furiously canceled the $3 million wire transfer the moment I handed him the forensic fraud report. He did not look at me with the sheer, unadulterated panic he displayed during our previous encounter. He approached the table with a profound, measured respect. He extended his hand, formally reintroducing himself. He explained that his massive urban development firm had spent the last 21 days aggressively auditing the commercial district. They concluded that my industrial warehouse was still the absolute cornerstone required for their ambitious municipal project. The property remained the most valuable commercial asset in the entire county. He informed me that his elite legal team had thoroughly verified my original untampered deed. He was no longer dealing with a pair of desperate, manipulative fraudsters attempting to launder stolen inheritance. He was dealing directly with the master welder who built the empire from the ground up. He placed a thick, pristine legal binder on the table. He stated that his firm was fully prepared to purchase the warehouse through legitimate, highly scrutinized legal channels. He offered the exact same purchase price of $3 million in liquid cash, completely unencumbered by bank loans or shady escrow accounts. He expected me to negotiate aggressively, anticipating a bitter fight over the monetary value of a building I had owned for 4 decades. I did not possess a single ounce of greed. I knew exactly what that concrete floor was worth. I looked down at the official commercial purchasing agreement resting on the glass table. I did not ask for a higher valuation. I did not demand stock options in his development firm or insist on retaining partial equity in the new construction. I picked up my heavy brass pen and signed my authentic calloused signature on the bottom line of the contract. The transfer of my life's work was finalized in a matter of seconds. I handed the document back to the developer, legally surrendering the warehouse where I had spent 40 grueling years inhaling toxic fumes and burning my retinas to build a secure foundation for my family. The executive looked genuinely surprised by the swift, effortless transaction. He thanked me for my profound professionalism and assured me the demolition crews would treat the site with the utmost respect. I shook his hand and watched him walk out of the office. The $3 million successfully wired into my secure, private holding account before I even stood up from my chair. Mr. Harding closed his laptop and offered his sincere congratulations on a flawless commercial exit. He asked me how I intended to manage the massive influx of liquid capital. He suggested establishing a high-yield investment portfolio to generate generational wealth for my grandson Evan. I firmly rejected that strategy. I explained to my attorney that accumulating massive stagnant wealth is exactly what created the toxic, arrogant entitlement that completely poisoned DeAndre. I refused to let $3 million rot in a sterile bank vault waiting for another generation to fight over it. I was not going to hand Evan a massive trust fund that would slowly strip away his basic work ethic and turn him into a carbon copy of his father. I intended to use my reclaimed fortune to execute a permanent, unbreakable structural adjustment to my legacy. I instructed Mr. Harding to draft the foundational paperwork for a fully endowed nonprofit educational trust. We were going to invest the capital into raw human potential. I wanted to ensure that the wealth generated by my grueling labor would actively benefit individuals who truly understood the value of calloused hands and aching muscles. I told Mr. Harding to prepare the incorporation documents immediately. I outlined the exact specifications of the new commercial entity. I utilized the entire $3 million sum to purchase an abandoned, dilapidated industrial facility on the south side of the city. We systematically converted the massive brick building into a state-of-the-art, fully funded trade school. I designed the curriculum specifically for underprivileged African-American youth residing in the inner city. These were young men and women who possessed raw talent and relentless drive but lacked the financial resources to escape systemic poverty. I equipped the facility with top-tier industrial welding stations, commercial electrical training labs, and advanced architectural drafting rooms. I did not attach my own name to the front of the brick building. I legally christened the institution the Lucille Davis Academy of Industrial Arts. It was a permanent physical monument honoring the immense sacrifices my late wife made during the lean, blistering years of our youth. I placed the entire educational foundation inside a highly aggressive, irrevocable blind trust managed strictly by a board of independent commercial directors. I explicitly drafted a legal mandate prohibiting DeAndre or any of his future associates from ever stepping foot on the campus, let alone accessing a single dime of its operational budget. The money would never fund a designer wardrobe, a luxury sports car, or a high society country club membership. It would actively build the futures of young students willing to burn their own hands and sweat for their paychecks. The immense fortune I bled to create was completely immunized against arrogant entitlement. I had successfully dismantled the fraudulent empire built by my son, secured the physical and legal safety of my grandson, and transformed my life savings into a powerful engine of generational empowerment. The toxic debris was entirely cleared and the new foundation was poured perfectly smooth. My commercial real estate legacy was no longer a vulnerable asset waiting to be exploited by greedy heirs. It was a fortified institution creating actual tangible value for the community. The freezing winter storms eventually surrendered to a crisp, bright spring morning. I sat in the sturdy wooden rocking chair on my front porch wearing my comfortable canvas jacket. The neighborhood was completely quiet. I held a steaming mug of black coffee in my hands, enjoying the bitter warmth. Evan was playing happily in the green grass of the front yard. He was kneeling in the dirt, pushing the handcrafted wooden fire truck I had carved for him on Christmas Eve. He was completely safe, entirely oblivious to the monumental war I had fought to secure his peace. There were no frantic phone calls demanding mortgage payments. There were no luxury vehicles crushing my azaleas. There were no arrogant threats echoing across my driveway. I took a slow sip of my coffee and watched my grandson smile under the morning sun. The absolute silence of my home was the most beautiful sound in the world. The silent adjustment was finally complete. True legacy is never defined by the accumulation of massive wealth or the blind preservation of toxic bloodlines. It is built entirely on the foundation of uncompromising integrity and the courage to sever ties with those who view your love as a weakness to exploit. We often mistake endless sacrifice for parental duty, allowing our silent endurance to fuel the arrogance of ungrateful heirs. You must learn to protect your peace with the exact same fierce dedication you used to build your life. Dignity cannot be purchased. Respect must be earned. The greatest inheritance you can leave is unyielding strength. Did you find value in my story? Please tell me which city you are listening from and share your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, you can support my channel by sending a super thanks so I can continue bringing more empowering stories like this to our community. I truly look forward to reading your perspective. On your screen right now, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend you watch next. There is so much more available on my channel. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I will see you in the next life story with